She was 5 months pregnant, carrying nothing but borrowed dignity, and the most dangerous man in the city had just remembered her face. If you've ever watched someone being destroyed in public while an entire room full of people looked away, this story is for you. Stay until the end. If this hits you, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. E.T. The Blackwood Imperial Hotel was the kind of place that made ordinary people feel like ghosts. Not unwelcome exactly, just invisible. The ceilings in the grand ballroom climbed 4 stories above the marble floor, hung with cascading chandeliers that cost more per fixture than Marina Hale earned in a year. The light they threw down was golden and merciless, the kind of light that flattered the wealthy and exposed everyone else. It caught the embroidery on the women's gowns, the cufflinks on the men's shirts, the careful architecture of hairstyles that had taken entire afternoon appointments to construct. It caught everything it was supposed to catch. It was never meant to catch Marina. She moved through the ballroom the way she moved through everything, quietly, efficiently, her eyes tracking the nearest exit without thinking about it, the way people learn to do when they've spent enough years in rooms where they didn't belong. Her uniform was the standard Blackwood Imperial black and white. Fitted black slacks, pressed white shirt, black vest with the hotel's discreet gold crest over the left breast. The vest was a size too small because she'd already exchanged it twice for the next size up, and there wasn't a next size after that. She'd asked housekeeping for an alternative 3 weeks ago. They'd smiled and said they'd look into it. She was 5 months along. The baby moved sometimes in the evenings when she was tired, small fluttering kicks that felt like someone tapping on a door from the inside. She'd learned to breathe through those moments without showing anything on her face. The Blackwood Imperial expected its staff to be furniture, present, functional, and featureless. Marina had become expert at this. She carried the tray level even when her lower back screamed. She smiled when she made eye contact with guests. She kept moving. Tonight was the Harrington Foundation Gala, one of the hotel's 3 biggest events of the calendar year. 400 guests. 8 figures raised for children's education programs, or so the glossy invitations claimed. Marina had worked the Harrington Gala for 3 straight years. She knew it for what it was. A very expensive party where the wealthy celebrated their own generosity while the staff refreshed their champagne flutes and pretended not to hear the conversations happening 2 feet away. She was making her second circuit of the East Wing when she first noticed Vivian Ashcroft. It would have been hard not to notice her. Vivian Ashcroft occupied space in a way that suggested the space had been waiting for her arrival. She was 41 years old, maintained with surgical precision, and dressed in a gown of deep champagne silk that had probably cost as much as Marina's rent for the next 4 months. She stood at the center of a cluster of women near the ice sculpture display, speaking in the particular tone rich women used when they wanted everyone nearby to hear them, but needed the fiction of a private conversation. Her laugh carried. Her gestures were wide and declarative. Her eyes moved constantly across the room with the quick, cataloging intelligence of someone who understood social hierarchies the way chess players understood boards. Marina had seen women like Vivian Ashcroft before. She knew the signs. She kept her distance and her circuit tight, working the outer perimeter where the servers could move freely. She was reaching for a used champagne flute on the tray station near the east wall when her lower back seized. It wasn't new. It happened 3 or 4 times a shift now, a sudden cramping that clenched all the muscles from her hips up through her spine and made her breath stop in her throat. The doctors at the free clinic had told her it was normal. 3rd trimester compression of the lumbar nerve roots, they'd said, which was a clinical way of describing what felt like someone driving a bolt through her tailbone. She'd asked how long it would continue. They'd said until the baby was born. She gripped the edge of the tray station, set the tray down carefully, and breathed through it. In through the nose. Out slow. Her eyes went to the middle distance, unfocused, the way she'd learned. Looking at nothing meant nobody could see the pain in your eyes. She didn't see Vivian Ashcroft until it was too late. She heard her first, that laugh again, closer now, and then the bright synthetic sound of women's voices moving in formation. And she was already turning, already reaching for her tray, and the collision happened the way bad things always happen. Not slowly, not with warning, just a sudden white compression of time and space, and then she was falling. She hit the mirror wrong. The decorative mirror behind the tray station was 5 feet tall and bolted to the wall. But the impact cracked the mounting bracket, and the whole thing shuddered, swinging on its remaining bolt, catching light in a fractured arc across the ceiling. Marina hit the edge of the station with her left hip, then the wall, then the floor. She got her hands down. That was the only thing she managed to do correctly. She got her hands down in time to stop her abdomen from taking the impact. Her palms hit marble and the skin opened immediately, but she'd kept the baby from hitting the floor. She lay there for 2 seconds, breathing. The ballroom didn't stop. The music continued. The conversations continued. The ice sculpture dripped steadily into its sterling silver basin. The Harrington Foundation raised money for children's education. Vivian Ashcroft looked down at her from very far away. "Watch where you're going." Her voice was mild, bored, calibrated to carry. Around her, the cluster of women had reformed as if choreographed, their faces arranged in the particular expression of people who had decided not to have seen anything they'd just seen. "These people," Vivian said, to no one and everyone simultaneously. "They're always underfoot." Marina pressed her palm flat against the floor and began to push herself upright. That was when Vivian's heel came down. She stepped on Marina's wrist, deliberately, unmistakably, deliberately, her full weight settling through that narrow stiletto heel onto the bones of Marina's left hand, and leaned forward just slightly, dropping her voice to the pitch of a confidence between two people who knew each other. "Stay down," she said. "It suits you." Marina's vision went white, not from the pain, though the pain was extraordinary. She could feel the bones bending under that heel, something in her wrist giving way in a way that made her entire arm go cold. Not from the pain, from something older and more fundamental, from the deep animal recognition of deliberate cruelty delivered with that particular flavor of enjoyment. She'd grown up around that flavor. She knew it immediately. She stayed very still. Around her, 400 people found reasons to look somewhere else. The man at the corner table near the main entrance had been still for approximately 12 seconds. She didn't know this. She couldn't see him from the floor, couldn't see anything except the hem of Vivian Ashcroft's champagne silk gown and the marble floor and her own blood welling from the open skin of her palms. She didn't know that 12 seconds was not a short amount of time for this particular man to remain still. She didn't know that the two men seated at the table with him had both, independently, gone very quiet in the particular way of people who have learned to read stillness as a countdown. She didn't know his name. She knew the room. She'd worked this hotel for 3 years, and she'd never worked the corner table near the main entrance on a gala night, because that table wasn't on the standard floor plan given to waitstaff. It didn't appear in the seating charts, didn't appear in the briefing materials distributed at the start of each event. Every staff member who'd worked at the Blackwood Imperial longer than 6 months understood, without anyone explicitly explaining, that the corner table wasn't a table you approached unless you were invited to approach it. She knew the room. She didn't know the man. His name was Lucian Graves. He was 38 years old, and he owned the Blackwood Imperial Hotel and 17 other properties across the city, plus a financial portfolio that various sources estimated in different directions, but that universally landed somewhere in the range of substantial. He had a line in his neck, not a scar exactly, but a mark, a raised seam of tissue that ran from behind his left ear down beneath his collar, the terminus of something that had been much worse before the surgeons finished with it. He had a tattoo that climbed from his collarbone up the right side of his neck, subtle at this distance, geometric and dark. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and he had the particular quality of physical stillness that very few people cultivate intentionally, the kind that came not from calm but from absolute economy of movement, from a body that had learned long ago to conserve everything until the moment expenditure became necessary. He had been watching Marina Hale from the corner of his eye for approximately 40 minutes. He didn't know why, not consciously. She was a staff member at his hotel, unremarkable in the way that competent, invisible service was designed to be unremarkable. He'd watched her work the East Wing circuit with a quiet efficiency that registered somewhere below the level of conscious attention, the way you register the sound of a clock you've stopped noticing, until it stops. He'd noticed the vest that didn't fit right. He'd noticed the way she braced slightly each time she set a tray down. He'd noticed, without cataloging the observation, that she never allowed herself to be stationary for more than 10 seconds, as if rest were something she didn't trust herself to want. He had not connected these observations into a conclusion until she hit the floor. When she hit the floor, something in his chest did something he had no name for. And when Vivian Ashcroft's heel came down, The two men at his table felt the temperature change before anything else happened. Lucian Graves stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move quickly. He crossed the ballroom floor at the same pace a man might cross a room to collect a drink left at the wrong table. And the crowd parted for him, not because they'd been asked to, but because something in the way he moved made parting feel like the obvious thing to do. Vivian was still speaking, something about liability, something about the hotel's hiring standards, when she registered the shadow falling over her, and she turned and she stopped speaking. Lucian looked at her for a moment that lasted long enough to be a statement. "Step back," he said. 2 words, very quiet. Vivian stepped back. Her heel came off Marina's wrist. She had the look of someone who had just discovered that the ice beneath her was thinner than she'd understood. Lucian crouched. He was a big man, and he crouched the way big men crouched, folding himself down with deliberate care, and he got one hand under Marina's shoulder and one on the floor beside her, and he said, very quietly, close to her ear, "I have you. Don't move yet." Marina's breath was ragged. Her wrist was on fire. She could feel the baby moving, not those gentle evening flutters, but something more urgent, a rolling shift that meant the fall had registered even in there, even in that protected dark space, and she pressed her free hand against her abdomen and tried to breathe. "Baby," she said. It wasn't a word she'd meant to say out loud. "I know," Lucian said. "We're getting a doctor right now. Don't move." He was looking at her hands when he said it, the bleeding palms, the already swelling wrist. And then he saw it. On the back of her left hand, older than the fresh blood, barely visible now but unmistakably present, a crescent-shaped scar, pale and smooth, the kind left by a specific type of wound that didn't come from falling. He went absolutely still, not the controlled stillness from before. This was different. This was the stillness of a man who has just been hit by something that had no physical form, something that moved through him from the inside out and rearranged several things simultaneously. Marina looked up at him. His face was unreadable. Whatever was happening behind his eyes happened in a place she couldn't access, and she was too hurt and too frightened for the baby to try. "I'm Marina," she said. It seemed important to say her name. It seemed important to be a person with a name, not a liability on a ballroom floor. He looked at her for another moment. "I know," he said again, very quietly. And the way he said it, the specific weight of those 2 words, meant something she couldn't interpret yet, something layered and old and complicated in a way that made no sense given that she had never, in her life, seen this man before. He helped her to her feet with the efficiency of someone accustomed to helping people who didn't want to need help. He kept one hand on her arm until she was steady. He spoke to the 2 men who had materialized at his shoulder, and the words were too quiet for Marina to catch, but one of them produced a phone, and the other moved toward the main entrance with the particular purposefulness of someone who had been given a clear task. Vivian Ashcroft was still standing 10 feet away. Her cluster of women reformed around her, though their expressions had undergone significant revision in the past 3 minutes. Lucian looked at her again. He didn't say anything. What he did was look at her in a way that apparently communicated exactly what needed to be communicated. Because Vivian Ashcroft, who had faced down investment bankers and litigation attorneys, and the various social wars of the extremely wealthy, looked away first. A hotel doctor was summoned. Marina was taken to the hotel's medical suite, which occupied a discreet suite on the 2nd floor that most staff didn't know existed. The doctor was calm and thorough and confirmed within 20 minutes that the baby's heartbeat was strong and steady and that Marina's wrist was severely sprained but not broken, and that she had contusions on her hip and both palms that would be painful but not dangerous. Marina sat on the examination table and answered the doctor's questions in short, factual sentences. She was good at factual sentences. She was good at not crying, which she had spent years practicing. When the doctor stepped out to retrieve something, she allowed herself 30 seconds. 30 seconds, hands pressed flat on the examination table, eyes at the ceiling, breathing through the thing in her throat that wanted to become something larger. The baby moved. That small interior tapping, regular now, reassured. She counted the taps. She got to 8 before she heard the door. It wasn't the doctor. Lucian Graves stood in the doorway. He'd loosened something about himself, not his jacket, not his bearing, But something in his expression had shifted from the blank public face he'd worn in the ballroom to something that had a different quality entirely. It wasn't warmth exactly. It was more like the absence of performance. "The doctor says you're stable," he said. "Yes." "Your wrist will need x-rays tomorrow. I've arranged for a specialist." Marina looked at him steadily. "I'll arrange my own appointments." A pause. "Fair enough." He didn't leave. She watched him not leave for a moment and then said, "You know my name?" "I have 400 employees at this location," he said. "I make it my business." It wasn't quite a lie. She could tell it wasn't quite a lie, but she couldn't tell what the true version of it was. "Why did you help me?" She asked it plainly, the way she asked most things. Not aggressively, but without decoration. He seemed to consider how to answer this. "Someone in my hotel was being hurt," he said finally. "That's a simple reason?" "People were watching for a long time before you moved." "Yes." The acknowledgement was direct, undefended. She'd expected deflection, and when it didn't come, she didn't know quite what to do with the absence. "My shift ends in 2 hours," she said. "I'd like to finish it." Something moved across his face. "Your shift," he said, "ended when you hit the floor." "I decide when my shift ends." Another pause, longer this time. "Then take the rest of the night," he said finally. "Full pay. You'll hear from HR tomorrow about the medical expenses." "I don't need—" "It's not charity." His voice was quiet, but very final. "It's what happened in my hotel. It's my responsibility." Marina looked at him for a long moment. He had the kind of face that was difficult to read, not because it was blank, but because there was too much in it, too many layers of things that had happened before this moment, and she was too tired and too sore to try to decode any of it. "All right," she said. He nodded once. He was turning to leave when he stopped, and she couldn't see his face when he stopped, could only see the back of his shoulders and the line of the tattoo above his collar, and he stood there for a moment in the doorway as if he were deciding something that had been waiting to be decided for a very long time. He didn't say anything. He left. Marina sat in the examination room alone and pressed her hand against her abdomen and counted kicks until the doctor came back. She did not notice the way 2 large, quiet men had positioned themselves in the corridor outside. She did not notice the way the hotel's security team, in the following hour, conducted a thorough and methodical assessment of the hotel's parking structure, service entrance, and all 3 routes Marina's personnel file listed as her regular commute. She did not notice any of this. What she noticed, riding home in the cab the hotel had arranged, watching the city lights blur through rain-wet windows, was the thing Lucian Graves had said when she'd hit the floor. "I know. Not I know about the baby, because she hadn't said baby yet when she'd first spoken. She'd said the word, and then he'd said it back to her, and she'd been too frightened to notice the timing of it, but she noticed it now, alone in the dark of the cab, and she turned it over in her mind and couldn't make it mean the simple, clinical thing it should have meant. She filed it away. She filed a lot of things away. It was how she survived. The cab turned onto her street and she paid the driver with the last of her shift cash and climbed the 4 flights to her apartment with one hand on the railing and the other pressed against her side. And she made herself eat something, made herself drink water, made herself lie down on the left side the way the clinic book said. And she lay there in the dark, listening to the city outside and the baby inside. And she thought about none of it. Or she tried to. The next morning changed everything. She woke at 6:15 to her phone, the alarm she'd set for her usual pre-shift routine, which she still maintained out of habit even on days off, because routine was the architecture of a life that had very little other structure. She lay there for a moment, cataloging the damage, the wrist wrapped and elevated the way the doctor had instructed, aching at a level she could manage, the hip bruised in a way that would make climbing stairs interesting for a week, the palms raw and bandaged, the baby, quiet now, the steady, low-grade pressure of a living weight she'd spent 5 months learning to understand. She made herself get up. There was an envelope under her door. She'd heard nothing in the night. No footsteps, no knock, no sound at all. And the envelope was plain white with her name written on the front in handwriting she didn't recognize, precise and angular, the handwriting of someone who had been taught formally and retained the habit. She turned it over. No return address. No markings. Inside was a card. On the card was the name and address of a specialist orthopedic clinic and an appointment time, 11 a.m., and a single line below it. No charge, no obligation, nothing else. No signature. Marina set the card on her counter and stood looking at it for a long time. She had moved 14 times since she was 17 years old. She had learned through the accumulated experience of 14 apartments in 14 neighborhoods and 14 sets of new circumstances that most kindness came with a price that didn't appear on the first invoice. She knew the taxonomy of charity, the kind that made the giver feel elevated, the kind that was really surveillance, the kind that attached invisible strings she'd spend years discovering. She had become expert at declining before the strings appeared. She looked at the card. She thought about what he'd said. It's not charity. It's what happened in my hotel. She thought about the way he'd crouched down beside her on the floor of the ballroom in front of 400 people, while 400 people looked away. She made herself eat. She made herself get dressed. She took the card. The specialist clinic was on the 40th floor of a building she'd passed 100 times without registering its existence. The waiting room had the quality of places built to calm anxiety. Low lighting, good chairs, the ambient sound of something that was almost music. Marina sat in one of the good chairs and felt conspicuously like herself, in her coat that was starting to fray at the cuffs, and her work shoes that had been resoled once already, and her belly that pressed the coat open at the front. The doctor was thorough and unhurried and told her what she'd suspected. A minor fracture in the distal radius, the bones barely separated, manageable with immobilization and time. He gave her a brace, gave her instructions, gave her a follow-up appointment in 3 weeks. When she asked at the front desk about billing, the receptionist smiled with practiced neutrality and said the account had been taken care of. Marina walked out into the building's lobby and stood there for a moment. She could have been angry. She'd rehearsed being angry on the way over, had prepared a version of herself that would decline all of this with a clean, clear refusal. But the fracture was real. The wrist needed the brace. And the baby was healthy. The clinic's imaging had confirmed it. The small, strong heartbeat printed now on a strip of thermal paper she'd folded carefully into her coat pocket. And standing in the lobby of that building with the city moving through the glass doors ahead of her, she found that the anger she'd rehearsed wasn't available. What was available was something more difficult. It felt like the first moment of being seen, really seen, by someone who had no requirement to see her. Not as a liability, not as a problem, just as a person on a floor who needed someone to say, "I have you." She didn't trust it. She knew better than to trust it. But she couldn't quite make herself not feel it either, and that gap between knowing and feeling was the most dangerous place she'd learned to live in. She went home. She made soup. She sat at her table with her brace propped on a folded towel, and she wrote out on a piece of paper the exact dollar amounts the doctor's appointment would have cost out of pocket, and she set it on the table like a debt. Because it was a debt. She was going to repay it. She was going to repay all of it, however long it took, whatever it required. That was the deal she made with herself, alone in her apartment, with the city outside her window and the baby moving steadily inside her, and the thermal paper printout folded in her pocket like proof of something she needed to keep. She did not know, sitting there, that across the city in the top floor office of the Blackwood Imperial Hotel, a man she had met once was sitting at his desk, not reading the contracts in front of him. She did not know that he was looking at his own hand, the left one, where a knife had gone through the palm during a night he never talked about anymore, and where a woman he'd never seen before and never expected to see again had pressed a clean towel and held it there and said, in a voice that had been frightened but steady, "You're going to be fine, just stay still." She did not know that the scar on her hand matched nothing so much as the scar on his, 2 wounds from the same night, mirrored. She did not know what he had been, that night, 8 years ago. She knew only a wounded man in the rain. She did not know his name. She still didn't know his name. The next morning, Marina returned to work. She had not been scheduled. HR had sent a message saying she was on medical leave through the end of the week, but she showed up at 6 a.m. anyway, in her uniform, her wrist braced beneath the cuff of her sleeve. The morning manager, a compact man named Davies, who had been at the Blackwood Imperial for 11 years and prided himself on being unflappable, saw her come through the service entrance and said nothing for approximately 3 seconds. Then he said, "Hail." "Morning, Davies." "You're on medical leave." "I know. I'm not supposed to let you on the floor." "I know that too." Davies looked at her for a long time with the expression of a man performing internal calculations that weren't going his way. "Hostess station," he said finally. "Seated work. You leave the moment anything hurts." "Deal." She took the hostess station. It was a smaller world. The greeting function, the reservation management, the careful mathematics of table placement. But it was work, and it was her work, and she did it with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. By the mid-morning rush, she'd found her rhythm again, the familiar ballast of purpose, the clean satisfaction of moving a complex system forward through skill and attention. She didn't see Lucian Graves that morning. She hadn't expected to. She heard about him, though, in the particular way information moved through hotel staff, in fragments and circumlocutions, and the careful language of people who understood that being known to speak about certain subjects was its own kind of liability. She heard that a major investment contract had been canceled. She heard that the cancellation had happened the previous evening, within hours of the gala, and that the company whose contract had been canceled was one Adrian Mercer had spent the better part of the past year courting, a deal that was supposed to have been the lifeline for his collapsing corporate structure. She heard that Vivian Ashcroft was Adrian Mercer's fiancée. She filed this information away. She had not asked for it, had not sought it, would not use it in any way she could currently foresee. But she filed it anyway, with the precise organizational instinct of someone who had learned, at considerable personal cost, that information was the only currency that didn't depreciate. She was at the hostess stand at 11:30 when a call came through the desk phone, not her cell, the hotel line, and she answered it the way she answered everything, with the clean Blackwood Imperial greeting she'd memorized her first week. The voice on the other end was male, unhurried, faintly familiar in a way she couldn't immediately place. "How's the wrist?" She went still. "Mr. Graves," she said. The specialist sent a report. "Minor fracture, 4 to 6 weeks." "I'm aware. You came in this morning." It wasn't a question. "I work here," she said. A pause. She could hear something in the background. City sounds, the suggestion of an elevated view, wind maybe, or the filtered silence of a very high floor. "Sit down while you're here," he said. "I am sitting down." "Good." Another pause, this one different from the first, not calculating but something else, something with a different texture. "I need you to know," he said, "that what happened last night isn't going to happen again. Not in this building." Marina looked at the reservation book open in front of her. Her name was in it, in Davies's handwriting, penciled into the morning slot with no title, no designation, just M. Hale, hostess in the quiet, pragmatic shorthand of a man who'd decided something without being asked. "I appreciate that," she said, "but I don't need a guarantee. I need my job." "You have your job. I need to work my job, without special treatment, without people knowing you made calls." A longer pause this time. "All right," he said. "Thank you." She waited for him to say something else, and when he didn't, she said, "Is there anything else, Mr. Graves?" "No," he said. And then, after a moment, "Yes. Stop calling me Mr. Graves." She almost laughed. It was involuntary, and it surprised her. A breath of something that wasn't quite sound but came from the same place laughter came from, and she pressed her lips together and breathed it back. "Good morning," she said, without answering. She heard something on the line that might have been, very briefly, the same not quite sound. She hung up. The day continued. The reservations moved through their slots. The lunch rush peaked and subsided. The afternoon turned quiet. Marina's hip ached steadily, and her wrist pulsed at the boundary of the brace, and the baby turned twice in the early afternoon, the way it did when she'd been still too long. She ate the lunch Davies left wordlessly at the corner of the hostess stand. Soup and bread from the staff kitchen, more substantial than the standard staff meal, and she understood it for what it was without making anything of it. At 3 o'clock, she took her 20-minute break. She went to the service stairs instead of the elevator, out of habit, because the service stairs were faster, and the elevator on the east wing ran slow, and she'd spent 3 years optimizing her break time. The service stairs were concrete and industrial, and never used by guests, which was why she'd always liked them. They were hers, in the way that unglamorous, useful spaces could belong to the people who actually used them. She was on the second-floor landing when she heard voices below. She stopped. Not eavesdropping. She wasn't positioned for it, had no angle on whoever was below, had simply stopped at the sound of her own name. Her name, distinctly, in a voice she didn't recognize. Male, clipped, the particular diction of someone mid-tier enough to be angry about it. Hale, the pregnant one. The boss is all over her files this morning. You see that? A second voice, lower. Keep it. I'm just saying, she comes out of nowhere, makes a scene at the gala. She didn't make anything. Ashcroft. Yeah, but she's the one who ended up in the medical suite with the owner. You think that's nothing? A pause. The sound of a door below. It's nothing, the second voice said. Let it go. The door opened and closed. Marina stood on the landing and breathed. She knew what this was. She'd known it was coming, had catalogued its arrival the moment she'd understood that Lucian Graves had crouched beside her on the ballroom floor in front of 400 people. She knew the particular shape of gossip in places like this, the way it moved through a workforce like weather, first as distant rumor, then as proximate speculation, then as received fact that everyone repeated without questioning. By next week, there would be a version of last night that made her calculating rather than hurt. She knew this. She knew there was nothing she could do about it except continue to be precisely what she was. She walked back up the stairs. She finished her shift. She pulled on her coat at 5:30, gathered her bag, signed out at the staff terminal, and walked out through the service entrance into the evening, which was cold and damp in the way November evenings in this city were cold and damp. Not dramatically, just persistently. The kind of weather that settled into your joints and your coat and reminded you that warmth was a managed condition, not a natural state. Her bicycle was chained to the rack outside the service entrance, the way it was every day. Or it should have been. She stopped. The bicycle was there. It was the same bicycle. Same frame, same faded blue paint on the top tube, same plastic basket zip-tied to the handlebars. But something was different, and it took her a moment to identify what, because the difference was in the absence of things rather than the presence of them. The bent rear derailleur that had made third gear a lottery for 3 months, gone. The cracked brake lever she'd wrapped in electrical tape because she couldn't afford the replacement part, gone. Replaced with a clean new lever. The slow leak in the rear tire she'd been pumping up every morning before work, gone. The tire firm, and correctly pressured in a way she'd stopped expecting from it. She stood there in the cold evening and looked at her bicycle. Someone had fixed it. Not repaired. Fixed, the way someone who knew what they were doing fixed something, with correct parts and correct adjustment, which took time and knowledge, and the specific kind of attention you only brought to things you'd decided were worth caring about. She looked around. The service entrance alley was empty except for the service van parked at the far end and the industrial bins and the ordinary ambient detritus of a large hotel's working spaces. No one. She stood there for a long time. Then she got on the bicycle and rode home, and the gears shifted clean, and the brake lever pulled firm, and the tires held the road without complaint, and she rode through the November dark thinking about a man she barely knew who had fixed her bicycle with his own hands without asking anything for it. And she felt the thing she'd spent years learning not to feel. That dangerous, undefended opening, that gap between knowing better and feeling it anyway, and she let herself feel it for exactly as long as it took her to reach her street. Then she locked the bicycle to the railing, went inside, climbed the stairs, and told herself it didn't mean what it felt like it meant. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, riding home through the November dark with the city closing around her, was that 2 different sets of eyes had watched her leave. One set belonged to a quiet man in a gray coat, standing at the corner of the service entrance alley, who had photographed her face and the bicycle and the building number clearly visible on the wall behind her, and who, within the hour, would transmit those photographs to a man named Victor Sloan. Victor Sloan, who had received those photographs in the back of a car moving through the same night Marina was riding through, who had looked at them for a long time with the detached, systematic interest of someone identifying a variable in an equation, who had said nothing to the man beside him, who had simply put his phone face down on the seat and thought. Victor Sloan, who had been watching Lucian Graves for 4 years, waiting for something Lucian Graves cared about more than he cared about himself. Who had, until last night, not found it. Who had now. Victor Sloan had a system. It wasn't complicated. Complicated systems failed in complicated ways, and Victor Sloan had spent 22 years watching complicated systems fail. His was simple. Find the thing a man wanted to protect and put your hand on it. Not to destroy it immediately. Destruction was blunt, expensive, and irreversible. You put your hand on it, and you waited, and you let the man know your hand was there. What happened after that was his choice. He'd used the system on city councilmen and federal prosecutors and 3 different police commissioners across 2 jurisdictions. He'd used it on rivals and partners, and on men who'd been both at different points in the same year. The system worked because it was true, because every man, no matter how controlled, no matter how armored by money or reputation or the willingness to do damage, had something he couldn't afford to lose. The art was in the finding. He had been trying to find Lucian Graves's thing for 4 years. It wasn't money. Lucian had more money than he had uses for. It wasn't territory. Lucian's territory was stable, defended with the quiet, comprehensive thoroughness of a man who had built it incrementally and correctly and didn't leave gaps. It wasn't reputation, because Lucian's reputation was the kind that operated on fear rather than esteem, and fear didn't require tending the way esteem did. It wasn't any single person, because Victor had surveilled Lucian's inner circle for 3 years and found nothing there that looked like vulnerability, only competence and loyalty of the type that was too well compensated to be tested. Victor was a patient man. He had waited, and then a pregnant waitress had ended up on the floor of the Blackwood Imperial Ballroom, and Lucian Graves had stood up from his table. Victor looked at the photographs again in the back of the car. The woman was plain-faced and tired-looking, her coat not quite right for the weather, her bicycle chained to the railing outside a building that his associate's preliminary report described as a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that was working hard to become something better than what it currently was. She was, by any external measure, unremarkable. That was the interesting thing. Lucian Graves had stood up for unremarkable. Victor put the phone face down and looked at the city moving past the window and thought about what that meant. What it meant that a man who hadn't stood up for anything visible in 4 years of surveillance had stood up for this. And the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. He didn't need to understand the reason. He just needed to use it. "Find out everything," he told the man beside him. The man nodded. "Everything," Victor said again, which was different from the first time he'd said it. The man understood the difference. Marina woke on Saturday to rain and a text from HR. The text was 3 sentences and professionally worded and informed her that her paid medical leave had been extended through the following Friday, at which point she should attend a return-to-work evaluation meeting with the department supervisor. It was signed with the HR coordinator's name and a direct extension and contained nothing overtly wrong in any of its sentences. She read it twice. She set her phone down. She made coffee. The problem with the text was not what it said. The problem was what it didn't say, which was why she was being given an evaluation meeting when she'd already been cleared by the hotel's own doctor and had worked 2 shifts without incident. Evaluation meetings were for performance issues and for liability concerns, and she didn't have a performance issue, which left liability, which meant someone had looked at what happened at the gala and decided that Marina Hale was a problem that needed to be managed. She drank her coffee standing at the kitchen window, watching rain move across the rooftops. She was not going to panic. Panic was unaffordable in every sense of the word, and she'd trained herself out of it years ago. Not the fear, you couldn't train yourself out of the fear, but the panic, the way fear became movement, became action, became worse problems. You felt the fear and you sat with it and you made the next practical decision. The next practical decision was to call HR and request the evaluation meeting be moved to Monday, which would give her the weekend to document everything. The timeline, the incident, the medical reports, the exact sequence of events on Thursday night, in writing, in the clean factual language she was good at. She called. She requested. The coordinator agreed without pushback, which was its own kind of information. She spent Saturday documenting. She wrote it out at her kitchen table, longhand first, because longhand slowed her down, and slowing down was how she caught the things her brain wanted to skip past. She wrote from the moment she'd arrived at the service entrance on Thursday evening through to the moment she'd left the hotel on Friday afternoon. She wrote what happened and what was said and who was present. She wrote the names she knew and described the ones she didn't. She was thorough and specific, and she wrote without adjectives, because adjectives were arguments, and she wasn't making an argument, she was making a record. She was 3 pages in when her phone rang. The number was the hotel's main line. She answered it. "Marina." The voice was female, careful, not unkind. "It's Sylvia Chen from Guest Relations. I'm sorry to bother you on your day off." Marina put down her pen. What is it? A pause. The kind of pause that preceded information someone had been asked to deliver but wasn't comfortable delivering. I want you to hear this from me before you hear it another way, Sylvia said. There's talk going around about Thursday night, about you, and about why Mr. Graves helped you. Marina's hand on the table was very still. What kind of talk, she said. The kind that starts when people don't have information and fill the gap with what they can imagine. Another pause. People are saying you engineered it. The fall. To get his attention. The rain hit the window. Marina looked at her 3 pages of documentation. Who started it, she said. I don't know. It was already everywhere by yesterday afternoon. Sylvia's voice dropped slightly. I'm not calling because I believe it. I'm calling because you should know it exists. I appreciate it. Marina, I'm fine. She said it the way she said everything she wasn't sure was true, flatly, with enough weight to end the conversation on that point. I'll see you Monday. She hung up. She sat there for a moment. Then she picked up the pen and kept writing. By Sunday, the rumor had developed a second layer, the way rumors did. The first layer being the implication of scheming, the second being the evidence people had constructed to support it. She heard this from her neighbor, a Blackwood Imperial concierge named Joel, who lived 2 floors down and who told her over the service stairs, with the uncomfortable directness of someone delivering news they wished they didn't have, that people were saying she'd been seen entering the hotel owner's private residence. She had not been seen entering the hotel owner's private residence because she had not entered it because she didn't know where it was, because until 4 days ago, she hadn't known Lucian Graves's name. I know that, Joel said. I know it's garbage. I'm telling you because you need to know what you're walking into Monday. What am I walking into Monday? Joel's expression did something complicated. He was a good man, careful and consistent, 3 years in the concierge role with the particular integrity of someone who had learned his trade honestly and held to its standards. He looked tired. Hendricks has been talking, he said. Hendricks. The department head above Davies, the one who'd presided over the evaluation meeting request. The one with the authority to do things that couldn't be done below his pay grade. What kind of talking, Marina said. The kind where he acts like he's defending the hotel. She understood. Thank you, she said. She climbed back upstairs and stood in her apartment and thought about everything she had and everything she didn't have and everything she was going to need. And she thought about it with the cold, systematic clarity of someone who had been here before. Not this exact place, but this configuration, this particular geometry of being a person without power, in a structure controlled by people who had it and who had decided she was a problem. She had her documentation. She had Sylvia's call, which was informal but real. She had the hotel doctor's report, which was factual and time-stamped. She had the clinic's records. What she didn't have was a witness who would say in a formal setting what had actually happened. What she didn't have was Vivian Ashcroft's name in any official report. She thought about calling HR back and asking whether a formal incident report had been filed under Vivian Ashcroft's name. She thought about what the answer would be. She didn't make the call. The Monday evaluation meeting was in a small conference room on the administrative floor, and Hendricks was there with an HR coordinator and a woman Marina didn't recognize who turned out to be from the hotel's legal team. Marina came in with her documentation in a manila folder and sat down and folded her hands on the table and waited. Hendricks ran the meeting with the language of someone who had been coached, or had coached himself, on how to say things without technically saying them. He talked about the hotel's commitment to a professional workplace environment. He talked about the importance of maintaining clear professional boundaries between staff and senior management. He talked about the gala incident in a way that managed to describe everything that had happened to Marina as things Marina had been involved in, a subtle but comprehensive passive voice construction that made her the subject of events without naming anyone else as the agent. Marina listened. She let him finish. Then she opened her folder and she said, I have a time-stamped incident report here. I have the hotel doctor's report from Thursday evening documenting blunt force trauma to my wrist, hip, and hands. I have a specialist's assessment from Friday morning confirming a minor fracture consistent with the incident. I have a record of my shifts worked and my performance reviews for the past 3 years. She set each page on the table as she named it. What I'd like to understand from this meeting is whether the hotel has filed a formal incident report under the name of the guest who caused this injury. The silence had a specific quality. The legal representative, who had not spoken yet, shifted in her chair. "Marina," Hendricks said in the voice of someone repositioning, "this meeting isn't about—" "What is the meeting about?" Marina said. "Specifically." A pause. "We've received some concerns," he said, "about the nature of your interactions with—" "From whom?" "That's not something I'm at liberty—" "I'd like to know who made a formal complaint about my conduct, what the complaint specifically alleges, and on what evidence it's based." She kept her voice level. Not aggressive. Level. She'd learned the difference young. Aggression gave people a reason to dismiss you, but levelness made them accountable for their own words. "If there's no formal complaint and no documented basis for a conduct concern, then I'd like to understand what this meeting is for." The HR coordinator was looking at her folder. The legal representative was looking at Hendricks. Hendricks was looking at the table. The meeting concluded 40 minutes later with no formal finding, a rescheduled return to work for Wednesday, and a form Marina was asked to sign acknowledging she'd attended a routine check-in. She signed it, took her copies, and walked out of the building into Monday noon, which was gray and cold and smelled like exhaust and damp concrete. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She had won the meeting. She knew she had won the meeting. The problem with winning a meeting like that was that winning it didn't make it not have happened. Didn't change the fact that someone had decided she was a target. Didn't change the rumor that was moving through the hotel like a weather system. Didn't address the thing she could feel building in the spaces between the documented facts. The thing that had no name yet, but had the shape and weight of something that was going to land on her before she was ready for it. She walked to the bus stop. She was sitting on the bench waiting for the eastbound when a shadow fell across her peripheral vision and she looked up. The man standing there was not someone she recognized. 40-something, well-built in the way of someone who had maintained fitness as a professional tool rather than a personal interest, wearing a gray coat that was too good for the neighborhood. He had the face of a man who had chosen at some point to make his face unreadable and had practiced. He sat down next to her. Marina looked at the street. "You don't know me," the man said. His voice was pleasant. This was more alarming than if it hadn't been. "I'm not here to threaten you. I want to be very clear about that up front." "Then what are you here for?" Marina said. "Information, a mutual benefit arrangement." He paused. "You've had a difficult week, a very public incident. Now you've got HR meetings and rumors and people in your building watching you. That's a lot of pressure for someone in your situation." Marina's hands were in her coat pockets. Her right hand was around her phone. "What situation?" she said. 5 months along. Single. Working a job that just became significantly more complicated." Another pause, and in it the calculation was visible. The deliberate deployment of facts to establish leverage. "I work for someone who can make all of that significantly less complicated." The bus was 3 stops away. She could see its headlights in the gray distance. "What does your employer want?" Marina said. "He wants you to make a statement, written, notarized, witnessed, attesting that Lucian Graves has engaged in a pattern of manipulation and coercion with female staff members at his properties, that Thursday's incident was orchestrated at his direction to create a dependency relationship, and that you were pressured." "No," Marina said. The man paused. He'd clearly expected to finish the sentence. "You haven't heard the compensation." "No." She said it the same way she'd said it the first time, with the same weight and the same finality. And she looked at the man directly now, which she'd been avoiding because looking at him felt like engaging, and she hadn't wanted to engage. But she looked at him now, and she said it again. "No." The man looked at her for a moment. Something in his pleasant expression adjusted. Not threatening, not yet, but the pleasantness became slightly more structural, more deliberate, which was its own communication. "You should think about this carefully," he said. "You're in a vulnerable position. People in vulnerable positions—" "Get up," Marina said. He blinked. "Get up," she said again, "or I call the police right now and tell them a man sat down next to me at a bus stop and offered me money to commit perjury, and you can explain to them who sent you." She had her phone out, screen already awake. "Your choice." A long pause. The man stood up. He straightened his coat with the calm of someone who had made a decision about how to file this interaction and would act on it later. He didn't say anything else. He walked away down the street without looking back. The bus arrived. Marina got on. She found a seat in the back and pressed her back against the window and breathed, long and slow, the deliberate breathing of someone managing something that wanted to become panic. The baby was still. The city moved past the windows. She knew, with the certainty of someone who had spent years reading the early indicators of things getting worse, that this was not the end of it. This was the man who ran toward you in the parking lot to tell you your tire was flat, while his associate was already on the other side of the car. This was the pleasant voice on the phone before the letter arrived. She knew this shape. She'd seen it before in different configurations with different faces, and the constant across all of them was that the pleasant opening was only pleasant because the person deploying it believed you hadn't understood yet what was coming. She'd understood. She needed to tell someone who could do something about it. She thought about Lucian. She dismissed the thought. She wasn't going to call a man she barely knew and tell him she'd been approached by someone claiming to want to damage him. She wasn't going to make herself a messenger in someone else's war. She wasn't going to give anyone the ability to say, accurately, that she'd run to Lucian Graves the moment someone had applied pressure. She was going to go home. She was going to write down everything that had just happened with times and descriptions, and she was going to figure out how to handle it herself. She went home. She wrote it down. She sat at her table with her documentation spread in front of her, and she thought about her options in the practical, unsentimental way she thought about everything that mattered. She didn't sleep well. On Tuesday, she returned to the hotel, one day early, against the evaluation meeting's conclusion, because staying home had begun to feel like a retreat, and she had never in her life done well with retreat. Davies looked at her once, said nothing, and assigned her to a service position in the East Wing restaurant rather than the floor, which she understood as protection and accepted without comment. The shift went wrong at 2:50. She was at the service station in the East Wing when Petra Voss appeared. Petra was a senior server, 6 years at the hotel, the de facto informal hierarchy of the service floor, the person whose approval shaped how everyone else treated you. She was 44 years old and had the professional competence of someone who knew her job completely, and the particular bitterness of someone who had expected the job to be temporary and found, 15 years in, that it wasn't. She had been cordial to Marina for 3 years in the particular calibrated way of someone who has assessed you as neutral, neither ally nor threat. She stopped at the service station and looked at Marina with an expression that was precisely controlled and precisely hostile. "You need to watch yourself," she said. Marina was restocking the tray liners. She kept restocking. "Okay," she said. "I'm not kidding. There are people on this floor who've worked here 10, 15 years. People who put in the time. And then you come in, make a scene at the gala, and suddenly you've got the owner calling your extension and Davies acting like you're made of glass." Petra's voice was low, deliberate, the voice of someone saying exactly what they decided to say. "It doesn't look good?" "I know what it looks like," Marina said. "Then you know why people have a problem." Marina set down the tray liners. She looked at Petra directly. "What exactly do you want from this conversation?" Petra's jaw tightened. "I want you to understand that the people you think are protecting you have their own reasons, and the people you think are coming after you. Some of them have been here long enough to know how this goes." "How does it go?" "The boss takes an interest in someone. Staff talks. HR pays attention. Eventually someone files something, and the someone who doesn't have 3 years of consistent reviews and 2 character witnesses ends up losing their job." Petra picked up a rack of glasses from the station. "I'm telling you this because you have a baby coming and you should know the arithmetic." She walked away with the glasses. Marina stood at the service station and felt the thing in her chest that she had no word for. Not anger, not fear, something that combined elements of both without being either. The cold weight of comprehension, of understanding exactly how many directions the pressure was coming from and exactly how much of it she could absorb before something gave way. She finished the shift. She walked out through the service entrance at 10 p.m., and her bicycle was where she'd left it, secure, maintained, the same bicycle that had been fixed without her asking. She stood looking at it in the dark. She was so tired. It was the kind of tired that had nothing to do with sleep, the accumulated weight of continuous vigilance, of spending every hour at work monitoring the temperature of every room she entered, of writing everything down, of managing her expressions and her body language, and her responses to everything while also managing the physical reality of a pregnancy that was advancing steadily regardless of what else was happening in her life. The baby moved and she pressed her hand against her side and stood there in the cold with her eyes closed for a moment. She thought about Petra's arithmetic. She thought about the man at the bus stop. She thought about the evaluation meeting, about Hendrik's passive voice construction, about the legal representative shifting in her chair. She thought about her rent, which was due in 18 days, and her savings account, which contained $412, and the fact that her last full paycheck had included 3 days of medical leave pay that was less than her normal rate. She opened her eyes. She unlocked the bicycle. She was reaching for the handlebars when she heard footsteps, not from the service entrance, from the side alley, the narrow service lane between the hotel's east wing and the adjacent building, and the sound was wrong. Too many footsteps, too synchronized, the sound of people who had been waiting to time their approach. She turned. 3 men, not large exactly, but built with the specific, efficient compactness of men who had been in enough situations to know that size was secondary to positioning and intent. The one in the front wore a jacket that was too light for the weather, which meant he didn't plan to be outside long. He stopped at a distance that was close enough to demonstrate purpose, but far enough to allow him to say technically that he'd just been standing there. "Marina Hale, Soul," he said, the pleasant voice, the same register as the man at the bus stop, which told her immediately who had sent them. She didn't move. "We're not here to hurt you," he said. "We came to talk." "I'm done talking," she said. The offer was generous. It's still generous. More generous, actually. "My employer was impressed by your answer at the bus stop. He appreciates a person who knows their value." The man smiled. It didn't change anything about his face. "The number has gone up." Marina's hand was on the handlebar. "What you're asking me to do," she said, "would destroy a person's reputation based on things that didn't happen. Reputation is negotiable." "Not mine," she said. The man's smile didn't waver. "We're going to need a different answer." The 2 men behind him moved, not dramatically, not rushing, just repositioning in the way people repositioned when they wanted you to understand that the perimeter had changed. One to her left toward the wall, one staying at the entrance of the alley. Not a threat yet. An argument about geometry. Marina looked at the 3 of them. She looked at the alley. Concrete, poorly lit, the hotel's service windows above on both sides, all of them dark at this hour. She looked at the street behind her, the entrance to the alley, which was now partially blocked. She thought about the baby. She thought about what it meant to be standing in an alley at 10 p.m. with 3 men who had been sent specifically because the pleasant conversation at the bus stop hadn't produced the required answer, and what it meant that the next step in this particular sequence was being demonstrated to her right now through the repositioning of 2 bodies in a dark space. She had been afraid before. She had been afraid many times in her life, in many different configurations, and she had learned that the thing fear wanted you to do, freeze, shrink, look for a way to make the thing threatening you feel better about itself, was almost always the wrong thing. The right thing was usually the thing that felt wrong, which was to be more of yourself in the moment, not less. She straightened. She looked at the man in the front and she said, in a voice that was completely level, "Tell your employer that the answer is no, that it will continue to be no, and that the next time someone approaches me on behalf of Victor Sloan, I will take everything I know to the people whose job it is to know it." A silence. The man's smile disappeared. The temperature in the alley changed. "You know his name?" he said. "I do now," she said, which was not entirely accurate. She'd heard the name from 2 different directions in the past week and connected it to nothing concrete until this moment, when the man's reaction had confirmed the connection. But it didn't matter whether it was accurate. What mattered was that she'd said it and he'd reacted, and the reaction told her she was right, and now she had to survive the next 30 seconds with that information intact. The man took a step toward her, and then the lights came on, not the alley lights. Those were already on, dim and industrial. The lights that came on were bright and white and came from 2 directions simultaneously, the kind of tactical illumination that was designed specifically to create disorientation and to communicate that whoever had turned them on knew exactly where everyone in the space was standing. Accompanying the lights was the sound of movement. Not loud, not dramatic, but multiple bodies, multiple entry points, the specific sound of trained people arriving at a location they had already mapped. Marina pressed her back against the wall. The 3 men turned. 2 large men stood at the entrance of the alley. Behind them, a third was coming through the service door, and then a fourth from the roofline access on the east wall. They moved with the calm, comprehensive authority of people who had done this specific thing before and had long since stopped finding it interesting. The three men in front of Marina made the calculation that was available to them. They made it quickly and correctly. Nobody moved toward Marina again. The man in front looked at her with an expression that was now free of pleasantness and free of the pretense of pleasantness. What was underneath it was informative. "This conversation isn't finished," he said. "Yes, it is," said a voice from the entrance to the alley. Marina looked past the three men. Lucian Graves stood at the entrance of the alley in the same dark suit he'd worn Thursday night, which told her he'd come from the hotel, from somewhere in the building, not from home. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, and he looked at the three men the way a man looked at a problem he'd already solved and was waiting for the solution to register. The three men left, not quickly, not with visible fear, but they left, which was the important thing, and they left through the street entrance, and people watched them go until they were gone, and then the alley was just Lucian and Marina and four large, quiet men standing at various points around them. Marina was still against the wall. Lucian walked toward her and stopped at a distance that was respectful, close enough to speak at normal volume, far enough to not be looming, and he looked at her with the expression she'd seen in the hotel's medical suite, the one that was the absence of performance, the one that had something real behind it. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." He looked at her for a moment. "You were about to bluff them with a name you weren't sure about." It worked. Something moved across his face. "It worked this time." "Is that what you came to say?" "No." He was quiet for a moment. The city moved around them, indifferent and continuous. The sounds of traffic and wind and the enormous impersonal machinery of a city at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. "Victor Sloan has been watching you since Friday. I should have told you sooner." Marina looked at him. "How long have you known?" "Since Saturday." The silence that followed had weight. "You knew," she said, "since Saturday, and you didn't tell me." "I was handling it." "That's not your—" She stopped, breathed. The anger was there, but beneath it was something worse, something that was not anger at all, which was the recognition that she had been under surveillance for 4 days without knowing it, that she had been walking through her week, the HR meeting, the bus stop, the shift with Petra, writing her documentation at her kitchen table, while someone had been watching her, and the man standing in front of her had known and had made a decision on her behalf without asking. "That's not your decision," she said. "I know. I am not something you manage." "I know that too." She pushed off the wall. She was shaking slightly, but not visibly, the kind of shaking that was internal, the after effect of 3 minutes of sustained adrenaline resolving through a body that was already operating at its margin. She picked up her bicycle from where she'd dropped it when she'd pressed against the wall. "I need to go home," she said. "My car—" "I don't need your car." He stepped back. She walked past him to the alley entrance and she stopped there, because stopping there was the honest thing. Stopping there instead of walking out without acknowledging any of it, which would have been the defensive thing, the thing she did when she was most afraid of what she felt. She stopped, and she said without turning, "Thank you for the timing." A beat. "The bicycle light is broken," he said. His voice was quiet. "The rear one. I missed it." She looked down. The rear light, the small red flasher she'd had for years. The clip cracked, had been there Thursday, and was not there now. She almost said something. She didn't say anything. She rode home in the dark, her back straight, one hand on the handlebar, one pressed briefly against her side. And she didn't let herself think about any of it until she was inside her apartment with the door locked. And then she sat down at her table with the documentation she'd been building all week, and she added tonight's entry. Time, description, names, sequence, in the clean factual language she was good at. She was halfway through the account when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. No introduction. One sentence only. "The rear light will be there in the morning." She set the phone down. She finished the entry. She lay down on the left side, and she stared at the ceiling, and she listened to the city and the baby and the profound, exhausting, complicated reality of being a person whose life had just become irreversibly entangled with someone else's war. Not because she'd wanted it, not because she'd sought it, not because of any of the things the rumors said, but because 8 years ago she had opened a door on a rainy night for a wounded. She finished the sentence in the morning. She'd stopped mid-word the night before, pen losing contact with the paper somewhere around 2 a.m., and she'd woken at 6 with her cheek on the documentation and her wrist aching inside the brace and the rear bicycle light sitting on the windowsill outside, placed there while she slept by someone who had access to the building's exterior, or had simply climbed the fire escape in the dark without waking anyone, which told her things about the people Lucian employed that she filed away without comment. She finished the sentence. She capped the pen. She looked at what she'd written, because 8 years ago she had opened a door on a rainy night for a wounded stranger, and the stranger had remembered. She crossed it out. This was documentation, not narrative. She rewrote it. Subject has prior undisclosed connection to hotel ownership. Nature and extent unknown. Potential relevance to current situation unclear. She made coffee. She ate. She got dressed. She went to work. Wednesday passed without incident, which was its own kind of incident. The quality of the silence on the service floor had changed, acquired a watchfulness, the particular atmosphere of a workplace where something was about to happen and everyone could feel it except the person it was about to happen to. Marina felt it and cataloged it and kept moving. She was good at kept moving. Thursday, she found Carolyn Marsh waiting at the service entrance at the start of her shift. Carolyn was a floor supervisor, not her direct supervisor, not in her department chain, which meant Carolyn's presence at her entrance at 7 a.m. was not routine. Carolyn was 52 years old and had been at the Blackwood Imperial for 19 years and had survived every reorganization and management change and gala season for 2 decades, which meant she was either very good or very careful, and Marina had always suspected both. She had a neutral face that Marina had never been able to read clearly. "Walk with me," Carolyn said. They walked to the end of the service corridor, away from the staff entry traffic, and Carolyn stopped and turned and said without preamble, "Someone went through your locker." Marina went still. "When?" "Yesterday afternoon, between your split shift break and your return. I saw Rains come out of the staff room with something in his hand. I didn't think much of it until this morning when I heard—" Carolyn stopped. Reset. "I heard Hendrix's name this morning in a context I didn't like." "What context?" Carolyn looked at her with the expression of someone delivering information they wish they could package differently. "Missing property," she said, "from a guest room. The word I heard was jewelry." The floor of Marina's stomach dropped. Not dramatically. She didn't show it, had learned to receive bad information without displaying its impact. But the drop was real, a physical sensation of something plummeting that had nothing to do with her inner ear. "That's not possible," she said. "I know. I haven't been near a guest room this week. I've been on service floor and hostess." "I know that too." Carolyn's voice was quiet. "That's why I'm telling you before anyone else does. Whatever's coming, you need to be ready for it today." Marina looked at the corridor wall. Concrete block, painted over so many times the texture had smoothed. She looked at it and thought with the cold, systematic speed of someone performing triage on a developing situation. Rains. She ran the name, junior floor staff, mid-20s, had been at the hotel 8 months. Had been the one to restock her tray station 2 days ago. Had been, now that she assembled the geography of it, positioned near her throughout the last 2 shifts in ways she'd noticed and dismissed as coincidence. Not coincidence. "Thank you," she said to Carolyn. Carolyn put a hand briefly on her arm. "Just a second. Just contact. The minimum gesture of solidarity available in a professional context," and walked back toward the service entrance. Marina stood alone in the corridor. She thought about the man at the bus stop. She thought about the 3 men in the alley. She thought about Victor Sloan, who had decided that direct pressure hadn't worked, and who had now, apparently, decided to try something that didn't require her cooperation. She thought about her documentation, sitting in a manila folder in her locker. She went to her locker immediately. The folder was there. Everything in the folder was there. Nothing appeared disturbed. But lockers at the Blackwood Imperial were the standard spring latch type that could be opened with a hotel master key. And if someone had gone in and out in the 15 minutes of her break, they wouldn't have needed to leave evidence of entry. She took the folder out and put it in her bag, against her body. She went to her station. She worked. At 11:40, Hendrix appeared on the floor. He was not alone. 2 people from HR accompanied him, and a security officer Marina didn't recognize, and the combination of their approach across the service floor had the quality of a formation, deliberate, witnessed, designed to be seen. He stopped in front of her. "Marina Hale," he said. The formal use of her full name in that context meant that whatever was about to happen had already been decided. "I need you to come with us." She looked at him. She looked at the people he'd brought. She looked at the service floor around them, at the faces of her co-workers who had all, with varying degrees of success, found reasons to be oriented toward this moment. Petra at the far station, watching with an expression Marina couldn't fully decode. Joel near the entrance, his face careful and troubled. Rains near the tray rack, not watching, specifically not watching, which was its own answer. "Of course," she said. They went to a different conference room this time. Smaller, no windows, on the basement level near security. Marina had never been in this room. The layout and the floor told her things about its usual purpose. They sat. Hendricks placed a clear plastic evidence bag on the table. Inside it, a bracelet. Gold, delicate, with a small diamond cluster at the center. And folded beneath it, visible through the plastic, what appeared to be several large denomination bills. "These were found in your bag during a routine security check," Hendricks said. Marina looked at the bag. "When was this check conducted?" she said. "This morning, prior to your shift commencement. My bag was with me this morning until I entered the building. Our security records indicate the check was conducted at the staff entrance. I wasn't asked to submit my bag at the staff entrance this morning. I came through the east service door, same as every day. There was no security check." She looked at him. "Who conducted the check?" A pause. "That information is in the security log," she said, "which is time-stamped and can be cross-referenced with the entry records. I'd like to see both." The HR coordinator and the security officer exchanged a look. Hendricks said, "The bracelet has been identified as belonging to a guest in room 1408. It was reported missing yesterday afternoon. I haven't been near the guest floors this week. My assignments have been exclusively service floor and hostess. That's documented in the shift assignment logs. We have a witness who—" "What witness?" The pause was longer this time. "A staff member who observed you in the vicinity of the guest elevator on Tuesday evening." Marina felt the geometry of it settle into place. Complete now. All the pieces assembled, the architecture of the frame visible in its entirety. Rains at her station. Rains with something in his hand coming out of the staff room. The witness who had been positioned to see something that hadn't happened the way they were about to claim it had happened. She had been here before. Not this exact configuration, but this shape. The shape of a version of events constructed from real locations and real people, and real objects arranged to tell a story that was not true. She was very calm. "I'd like to speak to legal," she said. Hendricks said, "Marina, if you'd just—" "I'd like to speak to legal," she said again, with the same weight, the same finality she'd used in the first evaluation meeting. "Before this conversation continues, that's my right. I'm invoking it now." Another exchange of looks. The meeting suspended. They put her in the small room alone. She sat there for 12 minutes. She counted them. She sat with her back straight and her bag on her lap and her hands folded on top of the bag. And she breathed the way she breathed through the spinal pain, long and managed, in through the nose, out slow. And she thought about what she had and what was being done with what she didn't have. She had documentation. She had 3 years of clean performance reviews. She had Carolyn, who had seen Rains, but who had not seen what Rains had been carrying, and who would not, in a formal setting, be able to say with certainty what it had been. She had the shift logs, if anyone pulled them, but the shift logs would require someone to pull them on her behalf. And the person who would normally do that was the department supervisor, who was Hendricks. What she didn't have was someone who would walk into that room and say, in clear terms, that what was happening to her was deliberate and coordinated and had been engineered by a specific person for a specific purpose. What she didn't have, in this building, in this room, in this particular moment, was anyone with enough standing to make the truth cost more than the lie. The door opened. It wasn't legal. It was Davies. He came in without being asked, and he closed the door behind him, and he stood there looking at her with the expression of a man who had just run upstairs and hadn't caught his breath yet. "Rains is gone," he said, Left the building 20 minutes ago. Hasn't clocked out, hasn't answered his phone. Marina looked at him. I need you to tell me something, Davies said. Not for them. For me. Did you take anything from this building that wasn't yours? No, she said. He looked at her for a long time. Davies had 11 years of reading people in high-pressure service environments. He had the specific, trained perception of a man who had spent a decade watching how people behaved in the moments they thought no one was paying close attention. He nodded once. Then sit tight, he said. He left. She sat tight. At 12:45, the door opened again, and this time it was the hotel's legal representative, the same woman from the first evaluation meeting. And behind her was someone Marina didn't recognize, a man in his 50s in a gray suit who carried himself with the specific weight of someone whose professional opinion was expensive. He sat across from her. My name is Caldwell, he said. I represent the hotel ownership in matters of significant concern. I've been asked to review this situation. Marina looked at him. Review it how? She said. Thoroughly. He opened a folder on the table. I'm going to ask you some questions. I'd like you to answer them directly. If at any point you'd like to consult independent counsel before answering, that is your right, and I'll respect it without prejudice. She looked at the folder. Ask? She said. He asked. He asked with the methodical precision of someone who already knew most of the answers and was assembling the ones he didn't into a structure. He asked about Thursday, about the gala, about Vivian, about the medical suite, about the subsequent week. He asked about the evaluation meeting. He asked about the bus stop. And here she felt the thing in her chest shift, because he'd used the phrase bus stop without her having mentioned it, which meant he had information from a source that wasn't her. You know about that, she said. I know about several things, he said. I'm asking you to tell me in your own words. She told him in her own words. She told him about the bus stop in the alley and the three men and the name she'd said that had produced a reaction. She told him without interpretation, without argument, in the same clean, factual language she'd used in her documentation. She put the manila folder on the table and pushed it toward him and said, Everything I just told you is in here, time-stamped. He looked at the folder. He looked at her. You kept records, he said. I keep records of everything that might matter later, she said. I've been doing it since I was 17. Something in his expression shifted. Not sympathy, something more professional than that, a recalibration. He closed his own folder. Wait here, he said. He was gone for 40 minutes. Marina sat in the small basement room alone for 40 minutes and felt, for the first time since Thursday, the full accumulated weight of the past week pressed down on her. Not the fear. The fear had been constant, manageable, filed away. This was different. This was exhaustion, pure and comprehensive. The exhaustion of someone who had been performing competence under sustained assault for 7 days while also managing a pregnancy and a fractured wrist and rumors and an HR process and a bus stop approach and an alley confrontation and a locker search and a planted bracelet and the particular psychic weight of walking into a building every day knowing that people who were supposed to be your colleagues had decided you were a target. She sat very still and felt it. She didn't cry. She wasn't going to cry in a basement conference room in a hotel where she worked. But she felt it. The door opened. Caldwell returned. Behind him, at a distance that was deliberate, far enough back to be deniable as connected to Caldwell's entrance, was Lucian Graves. He didn't come in. He stood in the doorway. He looked at her with an expression she had no previous experience of, something that was not the controlled blankness of the ballroom, or the quiet professionalism of the phone call, or even the direct urgency of the alley. It was something older and rawer than any of those, and it lasted only a second before he put the other face back on, but she'd seen it. Caldwell set a sheet of paper in front of her. The security footage from Tuesday evening has been reviewed, he said. It shows you on the service floor at the time you were alleged to be near the guest elevator. It also shows a staff member accessing the lockers in the staff room during your shift break on Wednesday. Well, he paused. The bracelet has been confirmed as having entered this building in that staff member's possession. The guest in 1408 has been contacted. The bracelet was not, it turns out, reported missing by the guest. The report was filed by a third party claiming to act on the guest's behalf. Marina looked at the paper. The formal accusation is being withdrawn, Caldwell said. You are cleared. The hotel will issue a written apology. She should have felt relief. What she felt instead was the specific quality of fury that comes not from being attacked, but from being made to sit in a basement room and prove that the attack wasn't real. The fury of having to spend 40 minutes of her life defending herself against something that should never have been allowed to reach her at all. She kept it off her face. "Thank you," she said to Caldwell. He nodded, gathered his folder, and left. She looked at Lucien. He came into the room now, all the way in, and he closed the door and he stood there, and she could see something in him that she hadn't seen before. Not quite guilt, something more complicated than guilt, something in the region of a man who has done what he believed was the correct thing and arrived at the moment of confronting what the correct thing had cost someone else. "The staff member," she said. "Rains." "He's been located," Lucien said. "He was working for Victor Sloan." "Yes." "Was Hendricks?" A pause. "We believe so." She nodded. She was looking at the table. "How long," she said, "did you know this was coming?" "I knew Victor would escalate after the alley. I didn't know the specific method." "But you knew something was coming?" "Yes." She looked up. "And you didn't tell me," she said. He held her gaze. He didn't deflect. "I was moving to stop it before it reached you. I was 12 hours too slow." 12 hours. She thought about the 12 hours, Barry. The morning shift, the floor, Hendricks' formation across the service floor, the basement room, 40 minutes. She thought about what 12 hours faster would have looked like, and what 12 hours slower would have looked like, and she felt the anger shift and become something colder and more precise. "I am not a position you defend," she said. "I am not a piece on a board that you move or protect or fail to protect. I'm a person who has been sitting in a basement room for 2 hours being accused of theft by people who were sent after me because of my association with you. And I did not have the information I needed to protect myself because you decided to manage it." She stood up. "I have spent my entire adult life," she said, "making sure that no one had the ability to make decisions about my safety without my knowledge. I have kept records, and I have known my rights, and I have never asked anyone for anything I couldn't justify needing. And in 1 week, because I happened to fall on the floor of your hotel, all of that, all of it, has been made irrelevant by people I don't know doing things I wasn't told about." She picked up her bag. Lucien stood very still. "You're right," he said. "I know I'm right. I should have told you everything from the beginning." She looked at him. He looked back. His face was, she didn't have the word for it, had never had occasion to develop the word for it because she'd never seen this expression on a person she'd known longer than 8 days. It was the expression of someone who was not used to having nothing to offer and was discovering what that felt like. "Tell me now," she said. "All of it. Everything you know about Victor Sloan and what he wants and how he intends to get it. Tell me right now so that I am never again in a room I shouldn't be in because someone thought I didn't need to know." He told her. He told her standing in the basement conference room of his own hotel, without sitting, without any of the usual architecture of a man delivering controlled information to someone he was deciding how much to trust. He told her about Victor Sloan, said, the 4 years, the surveillance, the attempts to find leverage, the Friday night photographs from the alley, the confirmation of his suspicion that Marina had become the identified weakness. He told her about Hendricks, bought 3 weeks ago, before the gala, which meant Victor had been positioning assets inside the hotel before the incident on Thursday, which meant the alley confrontation had been preparation, not reaction. He told her about the original night, and here his voice changed, acquired a different quality, became less controlled and more careful in the way of someone speaking about a thing they had protected for a long time. About the night 8 years ago, the safe house that had been compromised, the men who'd been tracking him, the building he'd stumbled into bleeding from a knife wound that had missed his femoral artery by less than an inch, about the apartment on the 3rd floor, about the woman who had opened the door. Marina sat back down. She sat down because her legs had made a decision her brain wasn't consulted about. She looked at him. "That was you," she said. "Yes." She thought about this man, the details she'd assembled at 23 years old from the available information, the wound, the clothes, the quality of his stillness, the way he'd said nothing about himself and accepted nothing she'd offered except the towel and the silence. She'd thought about him sometimes over the years, not often, but sometimes. The stranger who'd disappeared before dawn, who had left nothing behind except the towel she'd washed and folded and kept meaning to throw away. "You left before I woke up," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because staying would have put you in danger. The people looking for me, if they'd found me there, you would have been associated." "I was 23 years old," she said, "living in a studio apartment. You could have said thank you." He flinched. It was small and controlled, but it was real. "You're right," he said. "I could have." She sat with it. She sat with the full, strange, impossible weight of it. The 8 years, the city between them, the randomness of the gala and the mirror and the floor, and the scar on her hand that matched the wound she'd pressed a towel against in the dark of a studio apartment when she was 23, and hadn't known yet how hard everything was going to get. She didn't know how to feel about it. She didn't have the time to figure out how to feel about it, because what she understood, sitting in that basement room with the clarity of someone who has just received the complete version of a story they'd only known in fragments, was that the equation had changed. The equation was no longer Marina Hale and a bad week at work. The equation was Marina Hale, visibly connected to Lucian Graves, targeted by a man who had been trying to destroy Lucian Graves for 4 years, with a child due in 4 months, no savings, a fractured wrist, a destroyed professional reputation in the building she worked in, and a network of planted witnesses who could do this again tomorrow if today hadn't worked. She had been framed and cleared, that was good. But she had been framed. That was the part that didn't go away. The part that meant the hotel's staff had seen her walk to a basement room by security and had heard whatever version of events moved through the building in the 40 minutes she'd been down here, and had formed an understanding of today that no written apology was going to fully revise. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Yes." "What does Victor Sloan do when a direct approach fails?" Lucian looked at her. "He finds another angle," he said. "He's already found 3. The approach, the alley, the plant." She was counting on her fingers, not dramatically, just organizing. "What's the next category?" Lucian was quiet for long enough that the quality of the quiet told her something. "Tell me," she said. "He goes after the thing itself," Lucian said. "Not the leverage, the thing." She understood. Not abstractly, she understood in the direct physical way that mothers understand threats to their children, in the cellular layer beneath thought where the real decisions lived. She understood that Victor Sloan had tried to use her and failed, and had tried to destroy her reputation and failed, and that the next category was not more clever and not more indirect. She put her hand flat on her abdomen. The baby moved. She looked at Lucian, and he was already looking at her hand, at the gesture, and his face had done the thing again. That stripped-back expression, that absence of performance, and she could see in it something she recognized from an unexpected direction. Fear. Not his own fear, fear for something outside himself. The particular species of fear that belonged to people who had things they couldn't afford to lose. She thought about what Petra had said. The boss takes an interest in someone, and eventually someone files something. She thought about what the man at the bus stop had said. "My employer was impressed by your answer." She thought about what Victor Sloan was and what he was willing to do, and what 4 months meant in terms of what she could and could not physically manage in the next stage of this. She stood up. "I need a place to stay tonight," she said. It cost her something to say it. She said it anyway. "Not because I can't manage alone, because I'm 5 months pregnant and someone just tried to have me fired for theft using planted evidence, and I am not going to spend tonight in my apartment waiting for the next thing without having already decided what I'm going to do about it." Lucian looked at her. "I have a property," he said. "Safe, private, no connection to my name on any public record. Alone," she said. "When this is resolved, I pay market rate for every day." He opened his mouth. "Alone," she said. "That's the condition. Take it or don't." "Alone," he said. She nodded. She walked out of the basement room ahead of him, back straight, bag against her body, the manila folder inside it, and she did not let herself think about the apartment she was leaving. The 4 flights of stairs, the kitchen table where she'd written everything down, the windowsill where the bicycle light had appeared in the night, all the small accumulated evidence of a life she'd built correctly and carefully in the only way she knew how. She did not think about it. She thought about the next practical decision, and the one after that, and the one after that, because that was how you moved through impossible situations. Not by surviving them all at once, but by surviving them one decision at a time, and trusting that the decisions would eventually accumulate into. The safe house was a brownstone on a street that had no reason to be noticed. That was its primary quality. Not the security system, not the reinforced door frames, not the window treatments that blocked thermal imaging, though all of those things were present and functional. Its primary quality was its ordinariness. It sat between two other brownstones of identical dimensions and similar age, on a block that had a dry cleaner and a hardware store and a coffee shop that opened at 6 and closed at 3, and nothing about it announced itself as anything other than what it appeared to be, which was a residential property owned by a holding company that owned 17 other residential properties in the city and had no visible connection to anything. Marina learned all of this because she asked. She asked everything, systematically, the night she arrived. The security protocols, the exit routes, the contact procedure if something happened when Lucian wasn't reachable. She walked through every room and noted the windows and the doors and the distances between things, and Lucian's security coordinator, a woman named Reyes who had the compact efficiency of someone who had been doing this work for a long time, answered every question without condescension or surprise. When Reyes left, Lucian stayed. He sat in the kitchen while Marina made tea she didn't particularly want, because making tea was something to do with her hands while she processed the full weight of the day. And they sat across the kitchen table from each other in the particular silence of two people who have said significant things and are now managing the aftermath. "I want to be clear about something," Marina said. "All right. This arrangement, the house, the security, it doesn't change the dynamic between us. I'm not indebted beyond what I've already agreed to repay. I'm not obligated to anything beyond what was said in that room. I know. I'm saying it clearly because I want it to be clear. Not because I think you'd use it, because I need to hear myself say it." He looked at her across the table. The kitchen light was the kind of kitchen light that asked nothing of anybody. Warm, flat, unremarkable. In it, he looked like what he was, which was a man in his late 30s who had been in a long and complicated war and was tired in ways that didn't show on the surface. "That's fair," he said. She drank her tea. "Tell me about Victor Sloan," she said. "Not the tactical version, the actual version," he told her. Victor Sloan had come up through the same networks Lucian had navigated 20 years ago, but differently, where Lucian had built laterally, accumulating influence through discipline and the quiet management of obligation. Victor had built vertically, which was faster and more unstable, a structure that required constant maintenance through fear. He controlled 3 distribution networks across the port and 2 of the city's 4 major freight corridors, and he had been trying to extend into the financial infrastructure Lucian had spent a decade developing, and Lucian had blocked him twice through legal mechanisms and once through the kind of mechanism that didn't appear in legal filings. Victor had taken this personally in the way that men who built through fear took opposition personally, not as a business conflict, but as an insult to the fundamental order he believed he'd established. "He's not going to stop," Marina said. "No." "So what happens?" "I've been building a case for 3 weeks. Financial irregularities, regulatory violations, the kind of documentation that makes his legal problems significantly more expensive than continuing. I have a prosecutor who owes me a conversation. If the documentation holds, When the documentation holds," he said, "Victor's primary protection against formal prosecution disappears. His remaining allies make a calculation. Most of them calculate correctly." Marina set down her mug. "How long?" "Days, not weeks." She looked at him. "You were already this far along when I ended up on the floor of your ballroom." "Yes." "And Victor identified me as leverage because I stood up." He said it simply, without deflection. "I hadn't done that in a long time, for anything visible." She understood the full weight of that without needing it explained. She went to bed at midnight in a room that was clean and quiet and belonged to no one, and she lay on the left side and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling, and she thought about what days meant and whether she believed it, and what she was going to do about the hotel and Hendricks, and the written apology that was going to mean nothing to the people who'd seen her walk to the basement, and what she was going to do when the baby came and she needed a job and a real apartment and a life that wasn't organized around someone else's war. She fell asleep mid-thought. She woke at 4 a.m. to her phone. Not an alarm. A call from a number she didn't have saved, and she answered it because it was 4 a.m. and 4 a.m. calls were never nothing. Ms. Hale, female voice, controlled, the voice of someone managing significant stress through professional manner. My name is Sandra Oaks. I'm calling because I know this is irregular. I know you don't know me. I'm calling because I work for Victor Sloan and I need to speak with you. Marina was sitting up. Her mind was clear in the specific way of someone who has trained themselves to come fully awake fast. How did you get this number? She said. I've had access to a significant amount of information in the past 3 weeks, including this number. A pause. I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because what's planned for tomorrow? I can't be part of it. I need you to know what's coming. Marina was already across the room, opening the bedroom door, because whatever was coming next, she was not going to hear alone in the dark. Reyes was in the hallway, already awake, already present, which meant the call had triggered something in the monitoring system. Marina put the phone on speaker. Talk, she said to Sandra Oaks. Sandra Oaks talked. She talked for 6 minutes, and when she was done, Marina stood in the hallway of the safe house with Reyes beside her and the phone between them, and both of them looked at it in the silence that followed the way people looked at something that had just changed the shape of the next 12 hours. Victor had moved up his timeline. The documentation Lucian had been assembling, the financial irregularities, the regulatory violations, had been partially obtained through a source inside Victor's own organization. That source had been identified. The identification had happened 48 hours ago. Victor had spent those 48 hours not running, not repositioning, but making a decision that Sandra Oaks described in her 6-minute phone call as scorched earth, the specific terminology of someone who had been in the room when the phrase was used. He was going after the documentation directly. Not legally, not through pressure on the prosecutor, directly, through the person who had compiled it and through the physical and digital locations where it was stored. He had people positioned. He had a timeline. The timeline was tomorrow morning, which was now today, which was in approximately 5 hours. And he had, Sandra Oaks said in the last sentence of her 6 minutes, a secondary target. Not Lucian. Someone Lucian would not sacrifice documentation to protect. Marina. Reyes was already on her phone. Marina stood in the hallway and felt the decision arrive. Not as a thought, not as a conclusion reached through deliberation, but as a physical thing, something that dropped into place with the finality of a door closing. The decision that the next 12 hours required her to stop being managed and start acting, regardless of what it cost, regardless of what she'd agreed to, regardless of the very rational and protective instincts that told her to stay in this house and let people with the right tools handle what was coming. She thought about the baby. Then she thought about what happened to people who stayed still while other people made decisions about their safety. And she thought about every room she'd ever been put in. The basement conference room, the evaluation meeting, the alley. And she thought about what all of those rooms had in common, which was that she'd been in them without the information she needed to control the outcome. Not again. She got dressed. Lucian was in the kitchen when she came downstairs. He'd been called before Reyes reached him. The monitoring had gone to him first, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he hadn't slept. He looked at her in the doorway. You heard, he said. I was on the call. He looked at what she was wearing, dressed, bag over her shoulder, the specific physical posture of someone who has decided to go somewhere. Marina, where's the documentation? She said. A pause. In a secure location. Where? Why? She looked at him. Because Victor Sloan has 5 hours and a secondary target, and the secondary target is me, which means I'm already in this regardless of where I stand, and I would rather be in it with information than without it. She crossed the kitchen to the table and put her bag down. Where's the documentation? He looked at her for a long moment, then he told her. The documentation was in 2 forms. Digital, stored on an encrypted server whose physical location was a data facility in the industrial district, and physical, the original financial records and correspondence, stored in the office safe at the Blackwood Imperial's administrative floor. Victor knows about the server, Lucian said. He's had 48 hours to position. He doesn't know about the physical records. Our source says his intelligence on the physical location is incomplete. Then the physical records are the thing, Marina said. Yes. And going to get them requires going to the hotel. before his people move on the server, which is the higher value target. They'll move on the server first. That buys maybe 90 minutes before anyone turns their attention to the administrative floor. So 90 minutes. My people can... How many of his people are positioned at the hotel? Lucian's jaw tightened. We don't have a full count. How many of your people can reach the hotel in 90 minutes without triggering whatever Victor has watching the entrances? A pause. Fewer than I'd like. She looked at him. I work there, she said. I've worked there for 3 years. I know every service entrance, every maintenance corridor, every staff-only access point. I know which security cameras are on the standard rotation and which ones have the 6-second lag on the pan cycle. She picked up her bag. I can get to the administrative floor in 15 minutes through routes that nobody who doesn't work the service side would know to watch. Absolutely not. Lucian. You are 5 months pregnant. I am 5 months pregnant, and someone has named me a secondary target, which means Victor Sloan has already decided my pregnancy is not a factor he intends to account for. Her voice was level. She kept it level through effort. I am not asking your permission. I am telling you what I can do and asking whether you want to use it. He was looking at her with an expression that had several things in it at once. The trained blankness fighting a losing battle against something more fundamental. The look of a man who understood the logic of what he was hearing and could not make the logic win over the other thing. If anything happens to you, he said, and stopped. Then make sure nothing does, she said. That's your job. Mine is getting to the administrative floor. A silence that lasted 10 seconds and felt longer. Reyes goes with you, he said. Yes. You do not deviate from the route. Agreed. The moment the records are out, you leave. You don't wait. You don't... Lucian. She said his name the way she said things that needed to end a sentence. I know. They moved at 5:15. The city at 5:15 had its own specific texture. Not asleep, not awake, the hour of delivery trucks and early shift workers, and the particular silence of streets that had stopped holding the night's business and hadn't yet started holding the day's. Marina knew this hour. She'd ridden through it on her bicycle 100 times, had cataloged its rhythms and landmarks in the way you catalog the things you move through repeatedly. Reyes drove. Marina sat in the passenger seat and watched the streets and felt her pulse, which was elevated but steady. The elevated but steady of a body that had been frightened enough times to know the difference between productive fear and the other kind. The baby was still. She pressed her hand briefly against her side. Still and present, and trusting in the absolute way that something that has no choice but to trust trusts. She was going to be fine. She was going to make sure. They came in through the loading dock on the west side, a service entrance used by the hotel's linen supplier between 4 and 6 a.m. on weekday mornings, which meant the dock door was propped open with a rubber wedge that the linen crew replaced every morning and removed every evening. A detail Marina had registered 18 months ago when she'd been assigned a 6 a.m. shift and had needed a faster route from the parking structure. The dock was clear. They moved through the service corridor, concrete floors, fluorescent lights, the ambient smell of industrial cleaning solution, and the deep building warmth of a structure that never fully cooled. Marina moved the way she moved through the ballroom, quietly, efficiently, with the muscle memory of 3 years of identical routes. Reyes moved beside her with a different quality of quiet. Camera at the corridor junction, standard pan cycle, 6-second lag on the east sweep. Marina timed it from memory, and they were past it in the gap. Stairwell B, the service stairwell that connected the loading dock level to the administrative floor without passing through any of the guest or public areas of the hotel. 12 flights. Marina took them at a pace that was faster than comfortable and ignored the complaint from her lower back and the particular breathlessness of a diaphragm increasingly compressed by the weight it was sharing space with. Reyes said nothing. She matched the pace and watched the doors and said nothing. 8th floor landing, the door to the administrative corridor. Marina stopped. She looked at Reyes. Reyes had her phone out, reading something. She held it for Marina to see. A text from Lucian. Server location compromised. His people moving. You have 40 minutes. Not 90. 40. Marina pushed the door. The administrative corridor was carpeted and quiet. The transition from the service stairwell as immediate as a change of register. Institutional concrete to professional neutral, the hotel presenting its different face for the people who ran it rather than the people who served it. The offices were dark. The corridor was lit by the overnight security lighting, which was dim and directional, pools of illumination with long shadows between them. The administrative suite was at the far end, 50 feet. They were 30 feet down the corridor when the door at the far end opened. Marina stopped. Reyes stopped beside her. The man who came through the far door was not hotel security. Hotel security wore the hotel's uniform and moved with the particular unhurried authority of people who belonged to a space. This man wore dark civilian clothing and moved with his weight forward and his eyes moving and his right hand positioned at his side in the way of someone who was carrying something he was prepared to reach for. Behind him, a second man. They hadn't been seen yet. The corridor lighting and the distance gave Marina and Reyes a 3-second margin, maybe 4. Reyes had her hand on Marina's arm already, the pressure communicating what they both understood. Back. Marina didn't move back. She moved forward. She moved forward because standing still was not an option, and retreat gave the administrative suite to 2 men who had come here for the same thing she'd come here for. And she was 30 feet from the door, and they were 50, and she knew the code. Reyes made a sound that was almost her name. Marina walked down this corridor toward the 2 men at normal pace, the pace of someone who belonged here, who was on a shift, who was doing a routine task at 5:30 a.m., and she kept her eyes at mid-distance and her shoulders back, and she let the 3 years of invisibility work for her. The trained unremarkability, the staff members' learned ability to move through spaces as furniture. The man in front saw her at 20 feet. He stopped. He looked at her. The uniform she'd put on before leaving the safe house, the hotel badge on the lanyard, the specific way she was carrying herself that communicated nothing except that she had a reason to be here that didn't involve him. "Staff," she said, not aggressively, flatly. The tone of someone mildly inconvenienced to find guests in a staff corridor. The man looked at her. He looked at her abdomen. He looked at the other man behind him. Something in the calculation shifted. Not enough, not to safety, but enough to produce 1 second of hesitation, and in that second, Marina reached the administrative suite door and put in the code she'd memorized 3 years ago from watching Hendrix's hand on the keypad. And the door opened. She went through. Reyes was behind her. She didn't know how, didn't ask, heard the door engage and lock from the inside, and that was enough. The safe was behind the credenza on the north wall. Marina had seen it once, 2 years ago, when Hendrix had forgotten to close the office door during a document retrieval, and she'd been walking past and had noted its location with the automatic precision she applied to all information that might matter later. Reyes was at the door, phone out, listening. Marina was at the credenza. She moved it. It was heavy, solid wood, file drawers along the base, and she was 5 months pregnant with a fractured wrist in a brace, and she moved it anyway, 1 drawer handle's worth at a time, using her hip and her body weight and the specific leverage of someone who has spent years carrying heavy trays and knows where her actual strength lives. The safe was a standard hotel administrative model, keypad and handle. She didn't know the combination. She'd known she wouldn't know the combination. This was the variable she hadn't solved before she came through the door. She looked at the safe. She thought about Hendrix, his patterns, his tenure, the kind of man who used his employee ID number as his email password and had never changed either. She thought about the date format on his desk calendar, the one she'd seen in the evaluation meeting, the photo of his daughter at what had been a graduation, the year visible on the banner. She entered a sequence. The safe stayed locked. She tried another. Behind her, Reyes said very quietly, "They're working on the door." Marina's pulse was in her throat. She looked at the safe. She thought about what she knew. She thought about what people used. She thought about what Hendrix was, which was a man of routine and mild vanity who had been at this hotel for 11 years and had never been asked to be more careful than the environment required. She entered the hotel's founding year followed by his extension number. The safe opened. Inside, a manila envelope, thick, the kind of thickness that meant multiple document types bound together, the kind that meant what Lucian had described. Financial records, correspondence, the accumulated evidence of a case that had taken 3 weeks to build and that could, if it held, end Victor Sloan's ability to operate in this city. She took it. She put it in her bag, flat against her body, the same place she'd carried her own documentation all week. Reyes said, "Now." The door was moving, not the lock disengaging, but the frame itself, the sound of a door being worked at the hinges from the outside, which meant they had tools and approximately 30 seconds. Marina looked at the room. She looked at Reyes. Reyes had already moved to the window, administrative floor 8 stories up, but the window faced the interior courtyard, the service courtyard with its dumpster enclosures and the covered walkway to the adjacent building that the hotel used for overflow storage. The window was not designed to open wide. Reyes opened it as wide as it went. Marina looked at the drop. Reyes looked at Marina. "I'll go first," Reyes said. "You follow, I catch." "You can't." 8 feet to the walkway roof. "I've done worse." She was already in the window frame. "When I'm down, you come. Don't think. Just come." She dropped. The sound was contained, managed, the landing of someone who had been trained to land. A half-second of silence. "Come," Reyes' voice from below. The door behind Marina cracked at the upper hinge. She climbed into the window frame. She was 5 months pregnant and 8 stories up, and her wrist was fractured, and she was sitting in a window frame looking down at a walkway roof 8 feet below with an envelope full of evidence pressed against her body. And she thought about every room she'd ever been put in, and she thought about the baby, and she thought about the 400 people who had looked away in the ballroom, and she thought about a man who had stood up when everyone else sat down. She let go. The landing hit her wrong. Her ankle rolled on the walkway roof surface, and she went down on one knee, the impact jarring through her hip and her back simultaneously, and the sound she made was involuntary and sharp, and Reyes had her arm before she'd fully registered being down. "Up," Reyes said. "Are you hurt?" "No." The ankle was either sprained or not. She'd find out when she stopped running. "I'm up." "The car is 2 minutes. Move." They moved. Down the walkway roof to the service ladder at the far end, the ladder down to the courtyard gate that was padlocked from the outside but not from the inside, through the gate and into the service alley, through the service alley to the street, and Reyes's phone was already up with the location broadcast, and the car was turning the corner as they reached the sidewalk. Marina got in. The door closed. The car moved. She sat in the back seat with the envelope pressed against her chest with both hands, feeling her pulse everywhere at once, her throat, her temples, the sole of her ankle, the deep low ache in her back that had moved beyond the spinal compression into something with a different character, something she didn't want to name yet. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. Not fine tremors, full shaking, the kind that came after the adrenaline had done its job and the body was submitting the invoice. She pressed them flat on the envelope and breathed. Her phone buzzed. "Lucian." She answered. "I have it," she said. Her voice was steadier than her hands, a silence on the line that had a specific texture, relief and something else, something that was the sound of a man reconfiguring his understanding of a situation. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." "Marina." "I'm not hurt," she said. "I have the documentation. Reyes is with me. We're in the car." A pause. "The server location," he said. "Victor's people got there. The digital records are compromised." She looked at the envelope. "Then, this is everything," she said. "Yes." The car moved through the early morning city, the streets still holding the hour's specific emptiness, the light beginning in the east in the thin preliminary way that preceded actual dawn. Marina sat with the envelope and felt the ache in her back that she was not naming spread slowly from the lower spine to something wider and more insistent, and she pressed her hand against her abdomen and felt the baby move. Not the quiet evening flutter, not the reassured rolling shift, but something more urgent, a sustained pressure that she recognized and had been told to recognize and had never expected to feel in the back of a car at 5:40 a.m. after dropping off a walkway roof. She looked at Reyes. Reyes was already looking at her. "How far apart?" Reyes said. It just started." "Marina." Reyes's voice was the voice of someone cutting through everything unnecessary. "How far apart?" Marina pressed her hand flat and counted and felt the thing she hadn't wanted to name arrive fully named, undeniable, with the specific biological authority of a process that did not negotiate with anyone's timeline or anyone's... The contractions were 8 minutes apart. Reyes said it before Marina finished counting. Said it in the flat professional tone of someone converting an emergency into a sequence of tasks, and Marina heard her own voice answer from a place that was surprisingly steady, given that the rest of her was not, I know, call it in." And the car was already turning. Reyes already on the phone, the city outside the windows moving past in the gray preliminary light of a morning that had not yet decided what kind of day it intended to be. The hospital was 12 minutes away. Marina sat with both hands on her abdomen and felt the contraction pass and felt the next one building and looked at the envelope on the seat beside her and thought, with the specific absurdity of a mind that continued processing regardless of physical circumstances, that she had not expected the best and worst moments of her life to arrive on the same morning in the back of the same car. Her phone was in her hand. She called Lucian. He answered before the first ring completed, which meant he'd been holding the phone. "Hospital," she said. "I need you to take the envelope, not because I can't keep it, because I need both hands, and I need to know it's somewhere that matters." A beat of silence that contained several things. "Which hospital?" he said. She told him. "I'll be there before you." She believed him. He was. He was standing at the emergency entrance when the car pulled in, and he looked at her coming through the door with Reyes's arm under hers and the envelope held against her chest, and whatever was in his face in that moment was something she didn't have the capacity to decode right then, something she filed away for later, the same way she filed everything that needed to wait. She handed him the envelope. Their hands were in contact for a second, his closing over hers on the edge of the envelope, and she felt the scar on her left hand, the crescent that matched his, the two wounds from the same night 8 years ago, pressed briefly against his fingers, and neither of them said anything about it. And then the envelope was his, and she was walking through the doors, and the hospital received her with the particular organized urgency of a system that processed emergencies all day and had developed efficient protocols for every version of this. She didn't look back. The labor was 11 hours. She hadn't expected it to be easy. The clinic had told her that first labors averaged longer, had given her numbers and timelines that she'd absorbed and filed without fully believing would apply to her specifically, the irrational certainty that her body would be efficient about this, the way she'd trained it to be efficient about everything. Her body declined to cooperate with this expectation. It proceeded on its own timeline with its own logic, and Marina lay in the labor room and breathed through it with the same deliberate managed breathing she'd used for spinal pain in evaluation meetings and 3 Men in an Alley, and found somewhere around hour 7 that there was a limit to what breathing could do. Hour 8, she stopped trying to be composed about it. She let it be what it was. There was nobody in the room she needed to perform for. Reyes had stayed in the waiting area. The nurses were professional and kind and had seen everything. And Marina was alone with the full physical reality of what her body was doing and what it had been through in the past 3 weeks. And she let herself feel all of it without management or documentation or the clean factual language she used to keep the worst of it at a distance. She cried at hour 8. Not from pain specifically, from the accumulated weight of everything the pain had opened the door to. She stopped at hour 9. She got back to work. The baby was born at 4:17 in the afternoon, 7 weeks early, small enough that the delivery team had a neonatal unit standing by, and he arrived in the world with a sound that was not the robust cry she'd imagined, but was present and sustained and undeniable, a thin, fierce declaration that something was here, something had arrived, something intended to continue. She heard it and felt the most profound physical relief of her life, relief that moved through her from the cellular level outward. And she said something she didn't plan to say, something that wasn't a sentence, just a sound. And the nurse put him on her chest, and Marina looked at him for the first time. He was very small. He was very complete. He had been through the entire past 3 weeks, the gala, the alley, the basement room, the window, the car, the hospital, in the only way available to him, which was absolutely, without defense or strategy or choice, present and surviving in the dark. She pressed her lips against the top of his head. She didn't say anything. Some things didn't require language. They took him to the neonatal unit for observation. She was told he was breathing well for his gestational age, that his lungs were functional, that the premature delivery was likely stress-induced, but that the outcome was better than it could have been, that she should rest. She was told several things she absorbed and filed, and then the room was quieter and she lay in the hospital bed in the particular emptiness that followed 11 hours of sustained physical extremity, and she stared at the ceiling. The door opened quietly. Lucian came in. He'd changed his clothes since the morning, which meant he'd been somewhere and come back, and he looked Not different exactly, but as if the day had done something to the surface of him that hadn't been done before, as if the controlled exterior had been subjected to sustained pressure and had held but showed the evidence of holding. He stood inside the door. "He's in the neonatal unit," Marina said. "I know, I spoke with the doctor." A pause. "He said strong." "He said functional," Marina said. "I prefer strong." Something moved across Lucian's face that was not quite a smile but occupied the same territory. He came to the chair beside the bed and sat, and they were quiet for a moment in the way people were quiet after things that had required all the words they had. "The documentation," Marina said, "with the prosecutor as of 2 hours ago. Hard copies and a full digital reconstruction. My team spent the morning rebuilding from secondary sources what Victor's people destroyed at the server facility." He paused. "The physical records you pulled were the keystone. Without them, the digital reconstruction is circumstantial. With them, it's a case. Will it hold?" "Yes." She looked at the ceiling. "Victor. His people have been withdrawing since mid-morning. When the documentation reached the prosecutor, 3 of his senior associates made contact with law enforcement independently." Lucian said it without satisfaction. Factually, the way she said things. "The framework collapses when the fear collapses. He built vertically." "And Hendricks? Terminated. The hotel's legal team is handling the formal process. There will be a full review of the gala incident, Raines's employment, and the conduct of the security check on Thursday." He paused. "The hotel's position, officially, is that you were the victim of a coordinated external interference operation facilitated by a compromised employee. The written apology is being rewritten to reflect that." "I don't need an apology." "I know, but the record needs one." He looked at her. "Your position has been reinstated at full standing. Davies has been offered the department head role Hendricks vacated." He accepted. She thought about Davies, who had said sit tight, and had walked out and had come back. "Good," she said. "He's earned it." Silence. "The bracelet," Marina said. "Where did it actually come from?" "Vivian Ashcroft." He said it plainly. "She sold it to Victor Sloan's associate 3 days before it appeared in your bag. She knew what it was going to be used for." Marina absorbed this. "Why?" she said. "Adrian's company was already finished. The investment cancellation accelerated what was already terminal. She needed someone to blame for that, and she needed Victor's connections to have any leverage left." He paused. "She made a calculation that didn't account for how things would go." "No," Marina said quietly. "It never does." Another silence, this one longer, with a different quality. Not the silence of people managing aftermath, but the silence of people approaching something that had been sitting between them since the beginning and had not yet been directly addressed. 8 years ago, Marina said. Lucien was very still. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer it the way you answered the other things, without managing it. All right? Did you know who I was before the gala?" The pause before he answered had the texture of something being genuinely considered rather than something being constructed. "No," he said. "I didn't know your name. I didn't know the building address. The situation that night was not one where I was in a position to make reliable records." He stopped. "I thought about finding you. In the first year, I knew the general area, the building type. I had someone look. They didn't find me. You'd moved. The lease was in a different name, a sublet arrangement, I assume." She had moved 8 months after that night, the way she moved every year or two, the accumulated restlessness of someone who had never lived anywhere long enough to call it permanent. "If they had found me," she said, "what would you have done?" He looked at her directly. "I don't know. I told myself I would have made sure you were all right and then left it alone." He paused. "I'm not certain that's true." She looked at him. "The scar," she said. He looked at his hand. "Yes. Mine is from the window frame. When I opened it, the night you came, there was a broken latch. I'd been meaning to fix it. I cut myself getting it open fast." "I know. I saw it when it was fresh." "You never mentioned it at the gala, in the medical suite, all of those conversations." "No." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because saying it would have changed the dynamic before you had the chance to decide what you wanted the dynamic to be. You'd just been hurt in my hotel. telling you that you'd saved my life 8 years ago. In that moment, it would have felt like I was making a claim on you, on what you owed me." She looked at him steadily. "I wouldn't have felt that way," she said. "I know that now. You should have trusted me with it." "Yes," he said. "I should have." It wasn't an apology. It was cleaner than an apology, which required performance and forgiveness and the whole architecture of a ritual she'd never had much patience for. It was an acknowledgement delivered directly by a man who had learned that the version of honesty he'd practiced for years, the selective, protective, managed kind, had a cost he'd been paying without recognizing it. She accepted it the way she accepted most things, completely and without ceremony. "I'm going to need the loan terms in writing," she said. He blinked. The transition from what had just happened to this was apparently unexpected. "The safe house," she said. "We agreed it was a loan, market rate. I want the terms documented." "Marina, I'm not negotiating the principal. I'm asking for documentation of what we agreed." A pause. "You just gave birth 6 hours ago." "I'm aware. The documentation can wait until tomorrow. I'm just establishing that it's happening." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, something in his face changed. The last layer of the controlled exterior, the final piece of the architecture he'd been maintaining since the ballroom, came down, and what was underneath it was simply a person, tired and relieved and something else she didn't have the word for, something that looked like the specific quality of a man who had been carrying something alone for a very long time and had just, for the first time, put it down. "In writing," he said. "Tomorrow." "Thank you." She closed her eyes. Not to sleep. She didn't think she could sleep yet. Her body still vibrating at a frequency too high for rest. She closed them because the ceiling was too much to look at, and the room was too much, and she needed 30 seconds of dark. She counted kicks, out of habit. There were none. He was in the neonatal unit, observed and small and breathing, attached to monitors that beeped with the steady, tedious insistence of things that were working correctly. She knew this. She'd been told this. But the absence of the interior movement, the flutters and taps and rolling shifts she'd been cataloging for 5 months, was something she hadn't anticipated, a strange, bereft quality to the interior silence, as if the apartment had been emptied of furniture overnight. She opened her eyes. "Tell me something," she said. Lucian looked up. "About something that isn't any of this," she said. "Anything." He thought for a moment. "There's a place," he said. "North of the city, about 90 minutes. There's a stretch of coast, private, undeveloped. I bought it 10 years ago, meaning to build something and never built anything. There's a bench someone left there, I don't know who. It was there before I owned the land. If you go at the right time in early spring, the light comes in at an angle across the water that's, I don't know how to describe it. It's the kind of light that makes you feel like you've been shown something that was there all along." Marina looked at him. "You've never built on it," she said. "No." "In 10 years?" "No." She thought about that. A man who owned hotels and brownstones and financial empires, who had a safe house on an unremarkable street and an unnamed stretch of coast with a bench that belonged to no one. And she thought about what it meant to keep a piece of ground empty for 10 years, and she didn't say what she thought about it, but she filed it. 3 days later, they let her hold him in the neonatal unit for the first time without the leads attached. She sat in the rocking chair the unit provided, practical, vinyl-covered, designed for exactly this purpose. And they placed him in her arms, and she felt his weight, which was small and genuine and complete, and she looked at his face, which was the face of someone who had arrived from very far away and was still getting his bearings. She thought about his name. She had not settled on one, had been circling several for months without committing, and sitting there in the neonatal unit with him in her arms, and the monitors beeping their steady working correctly, and the afternoon light coming through the unit window at the angle that precedes evening, she looked at him and knew. Eli. It was not a dramatic name. It was not a name with a story she'd have to explain. It was a name that sounded like what it was. Simple, present, itself. "Eli," she said quietly, just to hear it. He moved his mouth. She counted his fingers. 10. On the 5th day, Vivian Ashcroft appeared. Marina knew she was coming. The hospital had called to ask if she wanted a visitor refused, and she'd said no, and she'd sat with that decision for 2 hours before Vivian appeared in the doorway of the recovery room with the particular diminished quality of someone who has been stripped of the architecture they'd been using to hold themselves upright. She was not the woman from the ballroom. The ballroom woman had been constructed, maintained, an edifice of presentation that required constant expense and attention. This woman was what was underneath all of that, older-looking, underdressed for who she'd been, her hands folded in front of her with a specific tentativeness, as if she'd practiced a version of this and had arrived and found the practiced version inadequate. Marina looked at her from the bed. "You don't have to be here," Marina said. "I know." Vivian's voice was different too, smaller. "I needed to be." Silence. "Adrian is gone," Vivian said. "Not he left me. Gone, the word that meant something more final than departure. His company's creditors took everything. He left the city. He didn't tell me he was leaving." Marina said nothing. "I knew what the bracelet was for," Vivian said. "I told myself I didn't, but I knew." She stopped. Reset. "I needed money, and Victor Sloane's associate offered a number, and I didn't ask questions I already knew the answers to." She was looking at her hands. "When they told me what happened at the hotel, the security thing, the accusation, I told myself it wasn't connected. That's the thing about knowing something and not knowing it. You get very good at the seam between them." Marina looked at her. "You're telling me this because you need to say it," Marina said, "not because it helps me." Vivian flinched. "Yes." "Then say the rest of it, and we'll be done." Vivian looked up. Her eyes were dry. She'd cried before coming here, Marina understood, had done the crying in private, which was its own kind of dignity. "I'm sorry," she said. "For the ballroom. For the bracelet. For every version of contempt I pointed at you because you were carrying something I recognized and decided to hate instead of acknowledge." She stopped. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking you to know that I understand what I did." Marina looked at her for a long time. "Sit down," she said. Vivian sat. "I'm not going to tell you it's all right," Marina said, "because it isn't. You put your weight on my wrist in front of 400 people, and you sold a piece of jewelry to a man who used it to have me accused of theft while I was 5 months pregnant." She said it in the same level factual tone she used for documentation. "Those things happened and they cost something, and the cost doesn't disappear because you understand it now." "I know, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being angry about it either. Not because you deserve to be released from it, but because I have a son in the neonatal unit and I need everything I have for him. I don't have the spare capacity for carrying what you did in addition to everything else." Vivian was very still. "The contempt you had for me in that ballroom," Marina said, "was never about me. You knew that and you did it anyway, which is worse than not knowing. But the thing you said I recognized, that's the part that matters. Whatever you recognized in me that made you want to diminish it instead of let it exist, that's the thing you have to figure out. Not for me. For whoever you're going to be when there's no more architecture left to maintain." Vivian left. She didn't say anything else. She stood up and she walked out, and Marina watched the door close behind her and sat in the quiet room and felt, not satisfaction, nothing as simple as that. Something more like completion. The acknowledgement that this particular thread had been followed to its end. Eli came home 11 days after he was born. He was small enough that Marina's coat folded around him twice, and still had room, and she carried him out of the hospital into the early spring afternoon with both arms and both hands and every available piece of attention, and the light outside was the kind of light that precedes real warmth. Not warm yet, but communicating warmth as an intention, the light of a season making a promise it intended to keep. Lucian was there. He stood at the bottom of the hospital steps, not with a car immediately behind him, not with the security perimeter she'd grown accustomed to reading without acknowledging. Just standing there, his hands in his coat pockets, looking up at her coming through the doors with the same stillness she'd first seen across a ballroom. The stillness that she now understood was not blankness, but the opposite of blankness, the quality of a man who is paying complete and unperformed attention. She stopped at the top of the steps. She looked at him. He looked at Eli. His face did something she had never seen it do, something unguarded and immediate. The expression of a person confronted with something small and genuine that their usual expressions had no category for. "Come up," she said. He came up the steps. She turned Eli slightly, and Lucian looked at him, not at Marina, at the baby, with the full undefended attention of someone who had forgotten for a moment to be careful about what showed on his face. "Eli," she said. He looked up at her. "The name," he said. "Yes. It's right." "I thought so." They stood there on the hospital steps in the early spring light, the city moving below them with its usual indifferent enormity, the traffic and the noise and the ordinary business of a world that had continued its rotations regardless of what had happened in the past 3 weeks. The loan documentation had been signed the previous day. The terms were fair, market rate, monthly, with a clause that specified the agreement as bilateral and voluntary, which was Marina's addition, which Lucian had accepted without argument. She had her documentation. She had her job back, the written apology on hotel letterhead, the formal restoration of her professional record. She had Davies in the position above her, which meant she had a manager she trusted in the chain between her and the people who had been brought in to replace what the past 3 weeks had removed. She had Eli. She had, and this was the thing she hadn't found language for yet, the thing that had been developing in the space between every conversation and every confrontation and every moment of honesty given and received without management or deflection. She had the beginning of something she didn't have a word for yet. Something that wasn't gratitude and wasn't obligation and wasn't the easy warmth of circumstances that had pushed two people toward each other. It was more complicated than any of those things. It was something that had been earned in the specific way that things earned under pressure were earned. Through the knowledge of who the other person was when things were bad, when the stakes were real, when the available options were all costly. She was not going to rush toward it. She was not built for rushing toward things. But she was going to let it exist, which was, for Marina Hale, the largest gesture available. They walked down the steps together. Not because she couldn't manage the steps alone. She'd managed everything alone. She'd managed alone for so long that the habit of it had become structural, load-bearing, the architecture of a life built on the principle that, depending on anyone, was a debt you'd pay in ways you hadn't agreed to. She walked down the steps with him, because she chose to, because Eli was warm and present in her arms, and the light was doing the thing light did in early spring when the angle changed, and because a man she hadn't known the name of 8 years ago was walking beside her, and because the distance between the person she'd been at 23, opening a door in the rain for a stranger because it was the thing to do, not because it would matter, not because anyone would know, just because it was the thing to do. And the person she was now wasn't as far as she'd thought. The cycle of it. Not complete in the sense of finished. Nothing real finished cleanly. She knew that too well to pretend otherwise. But complete in the sense of returned, of a thing sent out into the world on a rainy night by a young woman who hadn't known what she was sending and received back, years later and through every possible complication, in the form of a man standing at the bottom of hospital steps in the early spring light. She had not expected any of this. That was, she thought, perhaps the point. The things that changed you were never the ones you prepared for. The ones you prepared for you defended against. The ones that changed you arrived on ordinary nights through doors you opened for ordinary reasons, and they left before dawn, and you kept moving, and years passed, and the city turned and turned around you, and one evening you were standing in a ballroom in a vest that didn't fit right, and the chandelier light was golden and merciless, and 400 people looked away, and one didn't. She shifted Eli to her left arm. She felt the scar on the back of her left hand, the crescent-shaped mark from a broken window latch, from a night she hadn't known would matter, pressing against the cotton of his blanket. She didn't say anything about it. She walked, and Lucian walked beside her, and Eli slept in the way of things that had arrived after a long journey and had decided finally that it was safe to rest. The city held them as it held everything, without preference, without ceremony, with the enormous patient indifference of something that had seen 10,000 versions of this story and would see 10,000 more, and still the light fell the same way every spring, and still people opened doors for strangers, and still the strangers sometimes remembered.